Good evening. We will bring the Assembly special meeting, which is our joint meeting between the Bartlett Regional Hospital Board and the Assembly, to order for February 1st, 2023. Mr. Bryson, there you are. Would you do our land acknowledgement?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Kanoshish.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Madam Clerk, will you call roll of the Assembly first and then of the Hospital Board?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bryson,
Present.
Ms. Hale,
Here.
Ms. Hughes-Scandies,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Treem,
Here.
Ms. Wall. I don't see that we have you on Zoom yet. Balagidok is not going to be attending. Deputy Mayor Gladishevsky
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum of the Assembly is present. For the Bartlett Hospital Board, President Solomon Gross,
Here.
Vice President Deborah Johnston,
Here.
Max Mertz,
Here.
Lisa Peterson. Brenda Knapp, I'm not yet seeing. Oh, yep. Ms. Knapp, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hal Geiger,
Present.
Dr. Lindy Jones,
Here.
Dr. John Raster,
Here.
Shelley Deering. I'm not seeing that we have Shelley online on Zoom. And have I missed anyone? I think that's everyone. And we do have a quorum of the hospital board present too as well, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And there's lots of new faces in the room, but some of that will be taken care of in our agenda topics. So with that,
Mayor Weldon,
yes, Ms.
question.
Gladishevsky.
Will we be able to see the two people that are not here? Just,
I'm not sure yet. I don't.
okay, thank you.
Then we
Mr.
can be able to see-
Mertz and Ms. Knapp, if you have video, can you please turn your cameras on so the members in the room can see you? Thank you.
There's their smiling faces. With that, this is just kind of a check-in with the hospital board. We appreciate all of you here tonight. We appreciate your service. Be advised that this is our third meeting in a row. So if the assembly seems a little weary or slightly cranky, it has nothing to do with you guys. We really are enthusiastic to see you guys here tonight. So I'll apologize the behavior for our late nights the last two nights, and most of us are working during the day. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the gavel to Mr. Solomon Gross.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, everybody. Are we going to be able to put our slides up on the screen or not? First of all, the hospital board knows you guys have been working really hard these last 3 nights, and we really appreciate it. And us as a board and myself, I just want to say that you guys give us a lot of thanks all the time. You know, you tell us, thank you guys for your service. And we want to thank you guys too very much for your service. And I tell you, the last 2 nights have been pretty wicked on you guys. And we really appreciate you being here tonight with us too. So with that being said, I know you guys don't want to hear me talk this whole time. We did put a quick slide presentation for you that I'm going to rapidly go through, and then hopefully we can just have a conversation with just board members talking to you guys in the assembly and being able to ask us questions and stuff like that. So the first one is, you know, I know that everybody wants to talk about the hospital finances. So, you know, the hospital has some issues with their finances, and we're not alone in this. All over the country right now, hospital systems are in trouble and having issues going on. so our hospital is not alone, and we're just really being trying to be proactive on this. So we can go to the next slide. We have senior leaders here. We have a new senior leadership team headed by our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Keith, David Keith, right there in the back room. He comes with us with 35 years of experience. Sam Muse, who's not new to anybody's faces here. We're really happy that he's accepted the job and is now our Chief Financial Officer. Kim, who's been with us in a couple of years, and she's now her new role as a COO and the CNO. So we're really happy to have her here. Tracy, who comes with massive years of experience in the state and the juvenile justice system, is our now Chief Behavioral Health Officer. So we're really lucky to have her. And then I think you guys all know Dallas. So we have half of Dallas half the time. Hey, Dallas, how you doing? So thank you guys very much for that. The next slide is kind of in the agenda. There was parts that you guys wanted to hear a little bit about how we've kind of aligned our hospital. And our CEO, when Mr. Keith got here, he had 19 people that were directly reporting to him. And it's kind of an inefficient way to run an organization when your head guy has 19 people underneath him. So what he did as part of his 100-day plan is he went and talked to his directors and his managers, and they went through several iterations of what their strategic structure would look like. And this is where we're at right now. So I know that sometimes it looks like that there's still a lot of people that's under our CEO, our CFO, or Chief Clinical Officer, our Chief Behavioral Officer, and then we gave Dallas not a lot, but hey, Dallas, we only got half of you, so that's kind of where we're at there. But if you see that in the yellow spot there, we have high-level directors that are actually reporting to the CFO, so they're handling a lot of the areas that the CFO would be doing or the CEO would be doing as strategic development or clinical processes and stuff. So it looks like it's a lot, but we have the directors and we have managers levels, and we're still working on this, but this new org chart went into effect January 8th of 2023. The next slide is a little bit of our financial picture. And I wanted to just kind of talk about this at a really high level, and you guys can dig into this after with this part as we go forward. So if you look at 2019, there at the little blue line there is just above the bar there, and I'm not a graph guy, Hal, so I'm going to do my best here, okay? So the thing is, that's what we're spending today, or we're making today, and then the blue line is kind of what we're making a day. So if you look at the very top where we are right now, we have that gap, and that the orange arrow up there is the gap between revenue coming in and revenue going out. And that's where we're trying to close that gap. And that's what we're working at as an organization. And that's what Mr. Keith has kind of tasked all of his senior leaders, and they've tasked their directors and their managers to work on and to come up with proposals on how we're going to get this gap coming down. And it's really interesting. And I don't want to waste too much time talking about this, but even in my personal business, we have that gap going on right now. And it's just such a correlation on what's going on in this whole country with cost of goods and services and the cost of people to stuff that's going on just in the world in general. And that's kind of where we're at with that. So we'll go on to the next slide. And so we're doing a bunch of studies, and we did a FTE study. We've got it a little back in draft form. So we've kind of, and I don't want to read this slide, but we've increased our nursing, our operations people, just a ton since COVID has affected us, right? But we set up a molecular lab and we had to hire people for that. We in the early pandemic times, we decided as an organization that we were going to shut down our surgery. So we had no more surgery. We had closed our operating rooms. That's for elective surgeries, of course. And that's a revenue driver for the hospital. So we weren't able to keep up with what we were spending and what we were coming in. And part of this was masked because for a couple of years, we got COVID funds, and we got all this COVID money, and it was masked, and it wasn't really showing kind of the picture, but you could still see that the money was dropping out, and we just weren't there, hit that microphone. So, you got more questions about this slides later on, we'll do that. We can go on to the next slide here. I just want to just talk about our net position. Our fund balance right now is $71 million, and 43 of that is unrestricted funds, and 28 is restricted funds, and we can have the CFO or our finance director or our finance chairperson or talk about that if we have questions about that. But that's equivalent to approximately 6 months or 7 months of daily money that we have cash on hand. Because the hospital spends, well, this number says, 348,000 a day. So, $71 million can go by really, really quickly. So I really believe that what our hospital is doing and what our administration is doing is being super proactive. So if we go to the next slide and okay. All right, before we go to the next slide, Madam Mayor has prompted me to see if there's any questions. So, Mr. Bryson.
All right, so your operating expenses, got those 348. What is the average daily revenue at this point?
So is Sam on the phone on here? Sam, can you talk about that, what the daily revenue is? Sam.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the daily revenue, so we in a given month, we average somewhere between I'd say net revenue would be between $8 and $10 million. And so that would be, somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000 a day.
Thank you, Sam. So I guess, Wade, I think that question would be kind of easily answered, is that we're losing $1 million and $1.5 million a month. Okay. And that's because our daily revenue is not keeping up with what we're spending. So to break it down into that fine a piece, we probably can get you that information if you like. Perfect. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, President Solomon Gross. It's great to see all of you here. I suspect that all or most of us have been in cost-cutting situations ourselves, and sometimes quite drastic. And my experience has been, when we first start tightening the belt, we start to see some dramatic results. Just being careful. So are there any results starting to roll in now from that initial belt tightening?
Absolutely. We've seen some initial results. Sam, can you just talk about the results that we talked about the other day?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really started messaging to the management team and directors right around Thanksgiving. So December is really the first full month that we implemented some of these measures, and we saw just in December, from November to December, we saw overtime come down by $50,000 over November, and November was down from the previous month. So we're seeing good things happening there. Obviously, incentive bonuses are coming down. Materials and commodities, we're making some progress on. So while it's not $1 million worth a month, we're seeing really good positive initial signs that the message is getting out and people are thinking about these measures proactively and taking them to heart. So.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks.
Does that answer your questions? Ms. Gladysevsky, Ms. Hughes Gandes, and Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I know it's not a precise thing, but when did this $1 million, when did it happen and when did you notice? Like how, yeah.
Well, that's a good question. So again, this has been happening for a while, but it's been masked by our COVID funds. Okay, so this has been told to us. I have to say though, when we got our new interim CFO, Mr. Tyke, and when Mr. Keith came here, really said, we need to stop this bleeding right now. You know, I know that Mr. Tyke said to me one day, he says, so does the board mind losing $1 million a month? I'm like, absolutely not. This is not what we did. What are we going to do to correct this? So, you know, there was areas, especially during the heat of the pandemic, that we couldn't cut, you know, so there was issues with that, but COVID funds were helping capture that. So Mrs. Candies.
Yeah, thanks. I'll follow up on that. So it looked like on one of the slides, you started losing $1 million a day, or that would be worse. That's less tonight speaking. You started losing $1 million a month in summer of 2020, and you said part of that was masked by the COVID funds. So do you attribute that those were to COVID expenses because you added so many positions and so it softened the blow?
I absolutely. There, you know, we added a bunch of positions. We're up like 141 FTEs approximately since the summer of 2019, and a lot of positions. You know, our expenses are up, our cost of goods are up, and that's definitely probably problematic of the whole situation that's going on right now. Deb, do you have something to say?
May I say something there or no?
I'm gonna get Mr. Smith, and then we'll go to you, Brenda.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Gross. So just on the cash and the restricted and unrestricted, I'm just trying to kind of link that to things I see, which is our, you know, something from our budget book and called fund balance. And I don't know, we may have to pull in Mr. Rogers here, but from our approved FY23 budget, I think that we did this last year in April, it showed estimated end of year fund balance at 60 million. I'm just trying to figure out, is that 60, is the fund balance the total number? Is the fund balance the unrestricted number? Anyway, I'm just trying to link those up.
I would defer to Mr. Muse.
Mr. Muse.
Yeah, thank you. So what you're familiar with is kind of a measure CBGA uses for unrestricted fund balance that takes assets and reduces it by normally current assets and reduces it by current liabilities. And what we have here is really strictly just how much cash Bartlett has. And so Bartlett's cash kind of comes in 3 different flavors. There's totally unrestricted funds. There's something that's called board designated cash, which is good. You can think of it as funded depreciation. Really, the measure behind that is we add the amount of depreciation to this kind of board designated account every month, and then we reduce the cash by whatever our capital spend is. So essentially, it's designated for capital purposes. And then the restricted funds are really those are monies that have been appropriated to capital projects currently. So they're restricted from use unless the assembly takes actions to unrestrict them.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. And Ms. Knapp, you had something to say?
Yeah, thank you. Kenny and Madam Mayor and Assembly. I just wanted, we aren't talking about the fact, though, that I think the big driver in our loss of revenues that hit us was when we had to really close down the elective surgery, because as Kenny mentioned at one point, that is, that's a major revenue source for the hospital. We need to have that inpatient revenue as part of our operations dollars. And we had to shut that down overnight due to COVID. So we still had the full component of staff because we needed to have people on board, not knowing what was going to happen from day to day in terms of needing to be ready to maybe have, expanded hospital operations and even, open up additional wings and other resources. And we needed to keep people on board for that. So, and it wasn't that it was masked in the sense that we didn't know what was happening, but it was offset by the federal funds. And that's why those federal funds were made available, not just to us, but to others, to keep hospitals open and afloat. But now that we're past that point, we aren't getting those funds. Getting our inpatient revenues back up has been slow. It's happening, but it's been slow. And that's where now we're having to take a hard look at, okay, what expenses do we need to tighten on or eliminate? So I think that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. Appreciate it. So, I'm sorry, Mr. Green.
Thank you. I totally understand the COVID situation. I think we couldn't have possibly done it any other way. So that's totally fine. Can you explain what the increase in FTEs has been? Was it entirely related to COVID, or were there other additions to staff that were not related to COVID?
I can do my best, and then I'll have someone else. So, one area is we set up a molecular lab. So there's FTEs right there, and then remember that FTEs sometimes aren't necessarily a body. It could be hours. So the extra hours is a lot of overtime. We had to bring up a lot of travelers to come up and giving up a lot of hours in that situation. And then, just different departments added people that, you're adding people sometime and you're contracting services and you're still having the same amount of people. So that's happened a lot. Specifics, I can get you all that specifics. I could have Mr. Muse talk about that real quickly for just a minute. Mr. Muse, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it's probably about 50-50. So 50% of it were additional programs, whether it was in the molecular lab. We added a lot of positions in behavioral health for PES, applied behavioral analysis, and then the withdrawal management unit. So I'd say maybe around 50% were positions added in behavioral health, and then 50% kind of other positions added throughout the hospital, whether it was molecular lab or additional staffing for things like environmental services that were necessary, for cleaning and whatnot related to COVID.
But just the applied behavioral health, that's for autistic children and stuff like that. I just want to make sure everybody understands the acronym. And if we say an acronym that you don't understand, please just stop us and make sure that we complete it so you guys get that. Ms. Uscandy?
Thanks, Mr. Solomon Gross. I just I guess follow up. I would love at a future date, you may not have that right now, but I would love in written form a little bit more detail on the 146 positions, just to see how many are actual full-time employees that we still have. And I don't know who would be the one to get that from, but just before I forget. And And I literally had to just check on my phone. 2020 was when the pandemic started, right? It was in 2019, because I still can't believe it's 2023. So it makes utter sense that that's when it started and that there were things you couldn't change. I will just make the comment, one of my major concerns upon hearing the position we are in now, it would always be good to hear about these things sooner. And I recognize that couldn't happen in the midst of the pandemic because, like I said, my brain is so fried from that pandemic that I didn't know when it started. But
So,
just putting that out there.
I get this one.
yes.
We have to also remember not only the pandemic, but 2 leadership changes and a few CFO changes, and they've had their hands full. So it's taken them a while, but I think as soon as they realize that they're coming to us.
We're also in the middle of doing an FTE study that we have it in draft form. And as soon as we get that, we'll, I'm more than glad to share that with you too. Ms. Hale.
Thank you. The PCR or the molecular lab, as we all know, that was an extremely high priority for the assembly, and we pushed very hard. And there was a lot of concern within Bartlett and within the board that it would end up being too expensive. And I think it turned out to be an enormous benefit for Juneau. It really, really was incredibly helpful during the pandemic. Is Bartlett able to maintain that lab and the staffing and the equipment now without taking a loss? Because that was the concern at the time, was it was just going to turn into a big loss.
I want to make sure this question's answered correctly. I know that the molecular lab is not in operation right now. And I know that the people that were working in the molecular lab are now working in other departments in our organization. I don't know. I can't answer that if that piece of equipment is in, well, I know the piece of equipment's not in use right this minute, and I don't know how it's going to be used in the future. But again, being a community-based hospital, we did this for the community. I mean, I know I pushed hard for this to happen, and Dr. Jones pushed hard for this to happen too. So yeah.
About the molecular lab. About the molecular lab, yeah, it was a game changer in our dealing with the pandemic. And they are looking at repurposing. It's a beautiful machine that does all kinds of things. So looking for ways to repurpose that to help with some of the tests that we have to send out. So I'm hoping that'll happen. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that the pandemic, I guess in May it's going to be over. Yeah, but the way that healthcare is delivered and the amount of people and the complications that are still there, they're still there. And so it's not like we can go back to 2020 the way we were doing it. I mean, just it takes more people, it takes more time. There's more worried about infectious diseases, and then also the secondary impact on the labor shortage. And so we're having people having to sit in the hospital forever because there's no nursing homes there. There's not the home health care. So all these implications have snowballed. So even though the pandemic may be over in May, our need for more labor is going to continue at some level.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Ms. Peterson.
I just wanted to comment on the testing and the molecular lab and everything. When the pandemic began, the school district health team partnered with Dr. Jones, the CBJ, and the hospital to have the call center, the hotline in place, and then the testing that resulted from that. It was an enormous undertaking. I mean, we started out testing a few people, and before long we were testing. It was unbelievable. The fishing industry, it was more than just our community. It was the lifeblood to keep us going. So I know now in hindsight, we can look back and say, wow, that was an awful lot of money, but our entire community benefited from that. And we were a benchmark for other communities. What we were able to do with that testing and our procedures was amazing. And it just seems so surreal in so many ways that it is now over. even though we know it's not. So I just wanted to caution us that that lab was amazing and the people that staffed it and the work that we did. So anyway, thank you. And thank you to all of you.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note on the record, say that Ms. Wall has joined us, and Ms. Wall, we're on item A of the in current financial situation on the PowerPoint, but we just stopped to ask some questions.
And Madam Mayor, we've had her on with us since about the second minute after I did the roll.
She's been on for a while.
Okay.
Mr. Solomon Gross,
I'm sorry, Ms.
I
Gladysevsky.
have a question. So I totally, 3 years ago when all this dropped on all of us, it was a lot of work for everybody in the hospital. And that is what that federal money was for. And you stopped surgery. My question is, are we getting into what you're doing, how you're balancing incoming with outgoing? I mean, I get there was leadership changes, pandemic crazy, money you didn't get from surgery that we got from the feds. We really pushed on the lab, and I appreciate Bartlett did it in spite of some concern. And I'm really glad to hear that both of you say that it really was a game changer and it was in the end useful, even though it was probably painful for everybody. So the plan for the future to know how you're going to balance your revenues and your expenses, is that coming up?
Yeah, and that goes right into our next slide.
Great.
So our phase plan of action. So right now we're in phase 1 and 2 of our plan, and it is written there. What we're doing is cutting down on, we're not giving bonuses anymore. We're cutting down on we're renegotiating our contract labor, what the cost of the contract labor is. There is, we're asking our directors and our managers to see areas where they can cut costs and still be able to give efficient and effective, most important care to our patients. And that's the most important. Sam, you want to talk about a couple other areas of phase 2, Mr. Muse?
Yeah, so we're reviewing all of our contracts with our vendors and trying to reduce any duplicative contracts that we have or contracts that we don't believe are longer necessary. Within the last, I believe, quarter, and Dallas could tell me if I'm wrong, we had about 30 travelers at Bartlett. So trying to figure out a way to not reduce them entirely, but phase them down a little bit, reduce our reliance on PRNs and casuals, try to incentivize early retirements for people who are eligible and might be close anyways. I believe we're currently looking at furloughs, not mandatory, but more discretionary if an employee wants to go that route and volunteer to be furloughed for a little bit. So again, all kind of more discretionary, not non-permanent, trying to figure out ways to reduce the number of hours being worked at Bartlett, more commensurate with the volumes that we see on the patient side.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. So, I guess I was asked by Ms. Stream, how's it going so far? I'm anticipating your question. So and it was great. It was a great exercise for me because I met with our senior leadership yesterday and I said, how's it going so far? That's something that we need to know. Well, so phase 1 and phase 2 is just kind of being activated right now. So as we see contract labor, Dallas gave us a great overview during our board meeting that it's coming down and we're negotiating contracts. People are going to be offered early retirement if they'd like, and that hasn't happened yet. I think that's in the next part within the next couple of weeks. So I think we're really going to hopefully see some true results in the next month or so. And then before we get into the phase 3, and the phase 3 is like streamlining leadership and realigning workforces and programs. And there's on this, it says program elimination. And I really hesitate to have that because I really believe that in order to grow our revenue stream, we need to actually increase programs, because in order to generate more revenue, you have to have more programs. So we're going to be very strategic on the way that we do that. Also, kind of going back to phase two, the staffing levels, and we're in the process, like I said earlier, that we have an FTE study that we just got in a draft form. And I really got a little bit of time to really study that, and I still quite didn't understand that. So I spent about an hour with Mr. Muse a week or two ago going over this study and understanding that, you know, sometimes Bartlett staffs to the maximum level, and then we'll have people not doing anything in these areas where the study kept saying over and over and over again, we need to be flexible. We need to be nimble in the way that we run our business. So if we're maxed out in this level, well, maybe we can move two or three of these people from day surgery when there's no cases today up to CCU or another area in our hospital. So that's something that management is really looking at doing and making sure that we follow through with this FTE study. So I'm going to be able to give you guys some more concrete information and answers on this in the next couple of months. And then to phase three, you know, any consideration of anything now has to go to the board. The first phase one and phase two pretty much are operational driven, where our management team should be doing that, but anything further would have to go to the board with the board permission, the board consent, and the board actually knowing exactly what's going on. And again, be more than glad to report anything back to you or seeing in our minutes and stuff like that. Mr. Smith, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. I was just curious to know what kind of feedback you've gotten from the workers, or anyway, non-management. I know there's a word for that, but about the phases in this plan.
You know, I think we've all got some mixed messages on the way that sometimes communication is so important. Greg, Mr. Smith, communication is so important. And I really wanted to make sure that this was rolled out with proper communication. So they've had a lot of town halls with their employees. They've really discussed and asked the managers and the people at the levels where we're all at, what can we do to better this organization and tighten it up? So, you know, there's change is always difficult for everybody. So there's people that are going to be happy with it, and then there's people that are going to struggle with it. And that's kind of where we're at right now. You know, I think that it's very important for this board to be completely transparent with our employees, with everybody that asks us, that they know exactly what we're doing and what we're working for and what we're striving for. And that one slide over there really kind of shows it, the gap, you know, money in, money out. We need to get it down. And I think that as we show that to our employees and to our staff and to our community, that they really understand that we're really trying to make the sustainable community hospital for the long run.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Gross. Since the pandemic will be over in May, and since we are expecting record numbers of tourists this year, and since we know that the summer is often a big revenue time for Bartlett, I'm sure everyone is thinking about that so that we don't cut staff so far now that we don't have enough staff in the summer. And that's really a question.
That's great. And we've talked about this board meeting, that it's really important that we do keep our staffing levels ready for action, you know, for our months of when we're going to actually have revenue generated through the tourist industry, and making sure that we have these services available. You know, someone breaks their ankle, having an orthopedic surgeon in here to fix it, you know, high generating revenue and something like that. So yeah, the senior leadership has assured the board that they are on board with that. Ms. Hughes-Scandies and then Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Following up on kind of same idea, Mr. Smith may have been asking. I'm thinking when I look at this about what the morale level is at the hospital right now, especially in a time when it's hard to get labor in all industries and people have lots of choices, especially in the medical profession. So what channels do you have for ideas to flow up? It's good to hear that you're doing town halls, but sometimes people really on the ground level have insight into where costs could be saved, especially with such a recent organizational shift with your higher levels of management. So what channels do you have there? And if you could just comment again on what the overall sense of morale is or what you're
Sure.
doing to that.
So I'm gonna have to defer this to a Bartlett staff member and maybe HR, maybe Dallas, you want to talk about that a little bit?
So for internal communications, we're using Smartsheet technologies, but we've got questionnaires with FAQs that we're updating every week, where the questions and the ideas from the employees are coming in. They can put their name on it or not. And then we answer the questions, we consider the ideas. And I'll just to give you an example, Sam Muse mentioned the idea of maybe looking at voluntary furloughs in phase 2. Well, that's not something we'd initially planned, but that came forward from an employee question and suggestion. Like if we're thinking of, in phase 3 where we might have to reduce some positions, why wouldn't we just ask people, are you willing to work a reduced work schedule first? And we have furlough provisions in our personnel rules. We have a way that can be implemented, and we're starting to do that. Just on a voluntary basis at this point. So that's just an example of kind of how it's actually worked.
Thank you, Mr. Hugger. Ms. Doppelman, can you have a lot of service lines that are coming into on the Bartlett plate, and you have a quite the task, because it's really important that we keep adding these service lines, because this is something I know that myself, I'm very passionate about behavioral health and the behavioral health of our community and what we're doing for our community. So can you just talk a little bit about your staffing situation and kind of maybe too on what the morale is like in your departments?
Sure. So I'll start with the morale. I think some of the service lines, folks are fine. There's a couple of service lines that you see people, they get a little nervous. And when people get nervous and there's a little more drama, we've had one specific service line that really started looking at their own productivity levels. And then they started looking at each other's productivity levels. And then there was arguments going on, and then pay discussions took place, and somebody was paid less than someone else. And then that caused turmoil. But that's really one section within the service lines of behavioral health. I was telling Mr. Keith earlier today that, from a behavioral health perspective at Bartlett, we kind of got nowhere to go but up. There's been a lot of stress and upheaval within the behavioral health service lines. There were service lines created that I don't think there was a lot of forethought into how those service lines were going to be sustained. This is a great service. Let's go ahead and get it going. And now I'm on the back end of that, trying to look at how do we kind of right side those resources. And through that is taking a look at the number of staff that we have now. When folks have resigned from positions even prior to this, we haven't been quick to fill them in certain areas because we want to see if we can increase the productivity of the staff that we do have within those service lines. And we've also been doing that for really the last 4 or 5 months, especially because we know that we have the crisis services building that's going to be opening up, and we need positions for that, those service lines. And so we're able to take some of those vacant FTEs and to be able to actually use them for that service line, so that we're not having this huge increase of FTEs to behavioral health.
Thank you, Ms. Doppelman.
Can I ask about those particular, because many of those are new, and then there's the building. Could you briefly go over what exists? What's the plan for the building? Just because it's new and I don't think we all understand like
Sure.
what's going to be in the building and
Yes.
who's going to be in there? Thanks.
So everybody from behavioral health, except for the Rainforest Recovery Center and the inpatient mental health unit that's actually in the hospital, will be over in that building. So the behavioral health outpatient psychiatric services, or BOPS, they will all be in there, mostly on the first floor. On the second floor, we'll have some of the crisis therapists, as well as some of the administration will be in there. I think we have about 4 or 5 office. My office will move over there. We've got applied behavioral analysis that will be coming into about 3 offices there to be able to provide in-office services. Right now, they do a lot of those services in the school, but that's only 9 months out of the year. They also do a lot of in-home services, but they're also hoping that by being in the building, they'll be able to work a wait list faster, to be able to call someone if there's a cancellation, to see if they're able to bring their child in to the office versus somebody, you know, a kind of short notice having, you know, the tech show up at the house to provide those interventions. And then I missed also on the first floor will actually be the crisis observation and stabilization services. So the 23-hour crisis stabilization for adults will be on the first floor. So there'll be 5 recliners. If you're familiar with the Crisis Now model, don't want to get into a lot of detail with that, but that's a recliner model in that short-term basis. It's not meant to be beds. It's supposed to be giving folks an opportunity to stabilize, have assessments, be connected with community resources, to then hopefully keep those folks in the community and also out of jails and emergency departments. Up on the third floor, so I already talked about the second, sorry. And then so up on the third floor will be the crisis residential stabilization services. So that's more of the 24-hour to 7-day services that will be provided on that floor. That's where the adult side will be, as well as the adolescent side, and they will be separated. And then we have 2 recliner chairs up on the third floor in one of the rooms that will be specific for that 23-hour crisis stabilization for adolescents, because we really do feel in this community that there's a strong need for those adolescent crisis services. We don't want to see adolescents being, you know, as a last resort housed somewhere in the hospital while they're waiting for higher level care services. We want to be able to work with them and their families to be able, again, to provide those community support so we can hopefully keep them here.
If I could just follow up, I don't want to go drag us down here, but I could use a, you know, which of those things are new? What have we been doing forever? We're just moving it over there. Because I know there's been somewhat of an expansion of all those services, and I don't understand what we always did and what new we're starting to do. So maybe we could talk some other time.
Sure.
Madam Mayor.
I had the pleasure of seeing a presentation done by Ms. Doppling, and I told her then that we would be bringing her in front of the assembly to repeat that presentation. So it was very educational.
Thank you, Ms. Doppling. Ms. McDowell, can you just come up just for a quick minute here and just kind of talk about just morale of the staff and what you've seen around there? I just want to finish up with Ms. Hugh Scandy's question.
Sure, thank you. You know, morale's it's a hard, oops, did I turn it off? We're asked, well, we kind of shared with our staff, with all the employees, because we realize that what we're going through now is almost kind of adding insult to injury. We've just come off of this COVID wave, which gratefully we didn't get hit as hard as some of our partners did in Anchorage and in Seattle, but it's all relative, right, to the number. And so we did have a lot of life-changing events that not only happened for our patients, but also for our staff. We went from the patients being very isolated, not allowing any visitors, creating a situation in which the nurse then had to be the caregiver, the family member, the support for that patient. And it did take a toll. So we're really trying to be aware of that as we're going into these new changes. This is an area that Bartlett has not chartered. These waters we haven't charted before. And so it's new for all of us. And I think just being really conscientious to that and to the fears. And when we had a meeting with our managers, someone said, you know, the staff are scared and they're nervous. And I said, I am too. Like, we haven't been here before, and we know where we don't want to go back to. We just have to figure out how to move forward past this. So we're really trying to offer a lot of support. I've been rounding and other senior leaders will round with the staff and just ask them, how are they? Do they need, they have everything they need for their job? Do they have any suggestions? And being really open with, if you have any idea, just even if you think it's silly, come to us and show us and help us. And that's really helped a lot. We're asking all of our staff to be leaders in that and helping us boost morale. When you see someone that is down, try to boost them up, or someone that's worried, try to help alleviate their worries and try to have us all have the shared mental model moving forward. And it is a challenge after we're coming off of COVID and then asking them to rally up one more time to do something different. It's a challenge, but I think, as been mentioned in this room, what the community has done and what Bartlett has done through COVID and the things that we thought this little hospital couldn't do, that bigger hospitals couldn't champion, we did those things. And I think if we can get everybody pulling in the same direction, making sure that people have the support they need, even if it's just, hey, how was your kid's baseball game? Or, we're going to put you on call so you can go to this birthday party, and making sure we're honoring them as people first and foremost. And then seeing them as staff and making sure that we're putting patient-centered, patient-centered. I think we'll get through this. And that's kind of been the messaging we've been sending through this process.
Thank you, Ms. McDowell. So we talked a lot about service lines. We talked a lot about morale and everything. So I just kind of really think that it'd be great if we just kind of have a roundtable discussion and let everybody kind of talk what they think. So Al, you want to start?
Mr. Geiger.
Mr. Geiger, I'm sorry.
Well, a number of things are kind of flooding into my mind. One of the things that when we first started talking about this, there was a lot of talk about just slamming on the brakes. And the more we looked into that, the worse that looked for an option. We have a lot of vacancy in the behavioral health. We need to staff that in order to generate revenue. You might be thinking, well, why in the world are you starting hospice and home care now when we have all these problems? Well, one of the huge problems we have is people can't be let out of the hospital because there's no place to go. So those service lines are very important. Adding to those service lines are very important to solving this picture. So this is a big puzzle. All the pieces have to fit together. And I think we don't really know exactly how to fix this, but we are moving forward and we're adapting. And as we understand the mistake we made when we put one piece in that didn't work, and we're finding where to put some of these pieces. So I don't know if that adds to the conversation, but.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Geiger.
Thank you.
Deb. You're welcome. Ms. Johnston.
It's hard to even speak about this because we were anxious we as a board were anxious going into COVID, what it was going to mean for us. We already talked about the molecular testing. We were worried that we would have a piece of equipment that had ongoing operational expenses that we couldn't sustain with the level of testing that post-COVID would be coming our way. For us in the board, it was, and we had a lot of moments of anxiety and fear, just like the staff do. We talked among ourselves and we're looking for a way out. And I think between the existing senior leadership and the board, we saw it coming. And as has been stated, we were a little behind the 8 ball to get in front of it. But I have every confidence in the senior leadership team that we have now. I'm very impressed with everyone that's there now, that they're going to help us on the operational side to pull out of this. I have not heard an idea that has come forward that has given me pause, and that hasn't, that I've rejected out of hand, because I think that coming forward to us is going to pull this hospital out of where the position that we're in right now. We're going to provide greater service to the community, in particular, the hospice and home care that has come our way, as well as the Wildflower Court. I personally had a family member that was on the med-surg unit for 7 weeks, trying to find a bed or a hospice caregiver for us to take him home. So I think that what we're moving forward to is greater service to the community, a more stable and sustainable hospital that will serve the community as a community hospital, as a borough-owned hospital as we move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Dr. Jones,
I
before you start, can you tell us the date in May that the pandemic's going to be over?
Joe said it was May something. What was it? May 19th.
May 19th.
May 19th it is, yeah. That's what I heard. This just echoing a little bit, I've been at this hospital for almost 30 years, and I'm very impressed with the leadership team we have. And I have a full confidence that Mr. Keith, Mr. Buse, Ms. McDowell, Ms. Dowling will take us through this rough patch we're in. So I'm very happy that they're here, and I think they have the talent to take us through this.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson, and then I want to go to Max real quick too, and then Dr. Raster has been with us for a little bit less than 24 hours. So he's going to be giving a 5-hour presentation after this. So no breaks. Ms. Peterson.
I have been a nurse for over 30 years, and I've been in Juneau for 15 years. And the one thing that I've seen in my career is that healthcare is always changing, and we adjust and we modify ourselves to the changing needs, not only of our profession and our work, but our communities. And so even though people are anxious about the changes that are coming, there's also opportunity. And so the mental health unit, the Wildflower Court, all of the hospice and home care, all those places need staff. And we're not going to find that staff outside our community. We're going to find it within our community. So the people that currently work for the hospital, people that are out there graduating from school, graduating from high school, graduating from UAS, are going to find opportunities at Bartlett. So one of the things that impresses me about this leadership team that we have is they have been so open to looking at other ways to fix the problem. And this is a nerve-wracking time. I mean, we can go over all the COVID changes and the anxieties in the community and trying to keep people working and keeping our school open and everything. But ultimately, in the end, we are going to fix this, and there are going to be jobs for our people. And I truly believe that.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Mr. Mertz, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you, Kenny. I just want to echo what Dr. Jones said. When Mr. Keith came here a little over 6 months ago, he kind of faced a fire hose. There's a lot of things that were in process. He had vacant positions he was trying to fill. And, I've been most impressed by the team that he's assembled so quickly. I mean, the 5 leaders that you've heard from tonight, plus others that are in the room there with you are really kind of, it seemed to me, coalescing around this new vision of Bartlett. As the finance chair, I'd be remiss to not mention Mr. Muse. Bartlett's gain was CBJ's loss, and we're very happy to have him. He's really hit the ground running and working very hard and doing some great things there. So I think in a year or two, we're going to see a very different discussion around what Bartlett looks like. And I'm really excited about that.
Thank you, Mr. Mertz. So the only senior leader that you guys haven't heard from yet is Mr. Keith. So we're kind of saving him for last here. So maybe he can come up and just talk for a minute or two.
1 minute.
One minute. 1 minute.
Mr. Gross, get the timer out. So very little to be said after the discussion. You've heard all the high points, and just to let it be known, I've worked with a lot of boards. You won't find a more engaged board than this. I can guarantee you that. This is more than a governance board. It's an operating board. So they are steeped in operations. And that's actually what makes us stronger, not lesser than that. From my perspective, it's also a learning experience for me. It's a little bit of storming and norming with CBJ. And I've gotten to know Rory and Jeff and Robert and others. And that's going to coalesce too. I think they've seen how we're pushing and we're trying to grow and we're trying to be nimble and agile honestly, in an organization that isn't made to be that nimble or agile, but we're making it work. And to me, that shows strength in the community. We have a great team. We have a great hospital, we have a great city, and we have great employees. We're coming through some hard times, but like you said, the opportunities are great and we're going to take them. I am thankful to have a team like this behind me, but I am thankful to have a team like this in front of me. It makes my job easier. So I'm more than willing to answer questions or deal with any concerns you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. We're not going to ask you any questions. I just want to say one more thing about one more new service line that we're working on, and just want to plug this into the Assembly's ear too, is Wildflower Court. And we're meeting regularly. We met today for a couple hours. Mr. Palmer, Mr. Keith was there. Our finance chair was there. Their board members from Wildflower Court was there too. So we're all making sure that we're working on this transition plan. So I just want to kind of get this on the Assembly's radar that we are going to come for an appropriation of $1.4 million to cover their bond and also their employee indebtedness that we'll have to take care of. So that's coming, and I know that just getting this on the radar and possibly a resolution to allow us to continue to work with their board and our board to complete this resolution. So I don't know if I did that properly, Mr. Palmer, but I tried to do that. And with that being said, I'm going to pass the gavel to Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Gross. I know everybody wants to say thank you to BRH, but in the light that we have a meeting immediately following this, we're not going to give everybody a chance. So you can thank them in person later. Again, thank you all for coming. We certainly went through a tough time as a community, and as an assembly, we probably did not thank our community hospital enough. I mean, you guys really stepped to the plate, and you're going through tough times. We're going to be watching the tough times with you. We're hopeful that your plans are going to go forward. We'll probably want to check back with you in April. But we have to remember as assembly, there's lots of things that they can do financially wise, but some of them are going to be, what's the fancy term that Mr. Keith, lost leaders. And one of them is going to be behavioral health. And that's really important to the community. And the other one is going to be hospice and home care. So remember, they may not hit the bottom line every time. So we may need to help them a little bit along the way, but we just want to thank you. And no, Ms. Glashevsky, I'm not coming to anybody. We're not asking any questions. We're adjourned.
You know, you're a very important board, and we don't want just random people on the board. So, and any help you can do with a system to recruit board members to continue the great board that you've had.
Oh, okay. I'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting of February 1st. Ms. Spiegel, will you please note our roll? We have almost everybody present in chambers except for Ms. Wall, who's online, and Walal Gadak, who is absent. Any additions or corrections to the minutes from the January 4th meeting? Seeing none, those are adopted. And that brings us to our first agenda topic, which is our investment performance update. And Mr. Rogers, can you please introduce our speaker tonight?
Yep, thank you, Chair Dream. The code says that we're supposed to give you an investment update once a quarter. We spare you that and try to give it to you twice a year. This is the spring update, and we've been under contract with Insight Investments for a couple of years now and have been happy with that relationship. And I am happy to introduce Mr. Salente and Mr. Whitholm, both of whom are in variously in New York and quite late at their hour. So I'll pass it along to them.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. If we can go to that first graph. Oh, perfect. Now, what this is a yield curve graph. It's a graph of, a representation of what various maturities. You see those along the bottom, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, all the way out to 10 years, and what each of those treasuries would be paying. And it's from 12/31 in 2021. And also the one on the top in the dark green line is from 12/31/22. The first thing that you notice is that interest rates have gone up. And in fact, the Federal Reserve has raised the overnight interest rate over 300 basis points, or about 3.75% actually, in just the last year. They're doing that in order to fight inflation. They pumped a lot of money and fiscal stimulus into the economy during the pandemic, and that ended up resulting in inflation. And so the other thing I wanted to point out about this yield curve, so we've had this really dramatic rise in interest rates. In fact, we haven't seen this in we're told, maybe 100 years. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at the graph on the top, short-term rates are actually higher than long-term rates. And that means that's what we call an inverted yield curve. Typically, shorter rates, the longer you go out in terms of maturity, the more you're going to get paid. And that's not the case right now. In fact, bonds in sort of that 1.5 and 2 year area are paying higher returns than you would get on a 10-year security. That usually has a bad implication for the economy. That usually says, gee, be careful, there's very likely a recession ahead. And in fact, when you get a yield curve that's inverted as much as this one, the spreads between the 2 year and 10 year are actually 70 basis points, with the 2 year higher by 70 basis points. So that that inversion of 70 basis points really tells you that there should be a recession coming not too distant in the future. However, we think we have good news. That yield curve inversion has always held in the past, but I think we've got a distortion. The Fed chairman was actually up speaking today at their meeting that they have for the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee. And he was talking about how unusual this recovery has been. And we're going to go through some of the slides and talk about that. But we actually see the economy perhaps doing a little bit better this year than we had originally thought. A lot of people were calling for a recession in the latter half of 2023. And we might avoid that. The Fed chairman was also talking about that the economy might avoid the recession at the end of 2023 today when he was speaking. And so let's go down to the next slide. The slide on the left shows you the cumulative savings rate. It's coming down, yes, but it's still stimulative to the economy. People saved some of those stimulus checks, and you can see those in the light green line when they came out in sort of March and April of both 2020 and 2021. And people saved all that money, and the cumulative savings rate is that darker green line. Yes, it's starting to come down, but it's still providing some tailwind to the economy. Also, people are beginning to feel comfortable enough to actually borrow on credit card. And so debt service as a percentage of income has also been rising. And let's turn down to the next slide, which really is going to talk about why we think this economy does remain strong. Here you've got the U.S. unemployment rate. In November, it was 3.7%, but we have now the December figure, and that's down to 3.5% unemployment. That's exceptionally strong. That's the strongest number that you've seen in something like 50 years. And so that's a really good sign for the economy. And in fact, last month in December, we were supposed to only get 80,000 new jobs, and we actually posted 223,000 new jobs. So that's looking very good and very strong in the employment market. And then the chairman talked about that today, how unusual it is to have the employment market this strong, particularly when he's raised interest rates almost 4% now in the last year. One of the things we look at a lot is it's going to come out tomorrow morning, comes out every Thursday, is initial jobless claims. And usually when the economy is running very well, they run just over 200,000 new claims. It came out last week and it was only 186,000. That was a big drop from where it had been before. You're looking at job openings, and while that has peaked up a little bit, just below 2%, and then it started to come off, we had that number come out this morning, and it's actually gone back up. And that's the number of job openings per person that's unemployed. So you almost have 2 times as many job openings as there are people that are unemployed. Look, in the last call, when you were talking about the hospital, it's hard to get staffing. It's hard not only to get hospital staffing that needs training, but it's hard to get almost any kind of staffing in any business. And that strength has shown some resilience through the economy. When the employment market is that strong, we're continuing to get some spending from the consumer. And the consumer is like, it's like 75% of the economy is just consumer spending. So that means a lot of strength from the consumer, and people feel free to spend when they're employed. Let's drop down to the next slide. We have seen some slowdown in private fixed investment, but a lot of that is residential structures. Because of the mortgage rates being a little bit higher, housing construction has slipped pretty considerably in the last 6 months of last year. But I will say that durable goods just came out last week, and durable goods was only supposed to be up 2.5% last week, and it was actually up 5.6%, so almost twice as high as we had predicted in the survey. So I think private fixed investment may start to turn around. Let's drop down to the next slide and talk about housing. Quickly, you can see as the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates in the left, you see 30-year mortgage rates starting to spike up. Now, they're a lot higher than we're used to, but it wasn't that long ago, maybe just 20 years ago, that they were at this level. So they've operated at this, right now, 30-year mortgages run at about 6.4%. They've operated at this level before. It hasn't shut down the economy. Is it ideal for home buying? Well, not as we see this. Michigan home buying conditions are pretty low. However, even having said that, I think some of this data is on a lag. We saw last week pending home sales were supposed to be down 1%, but they actually ended up 2.5%. We saw new home sales, which were supposed to drop by 4.4%, and they actually went up too at 2.3%. So the home buying market is starting to turn around. Mortgage rates have come down a little bit off their highs. Housing is still in demand. So I think that residential sector is going to start to turn around. What about, but people say, okay, the Federal Reserve's worried about inflation. That's why they've been raising interest rates. What's happening with inflation? Let's take a look. Let's go down to the next slide and take a look at that. Is it high? It's high. We haven't seen that peak. In August, it peaked out at 9.1% on the CPI, and we hadn't seen those numbers in almost 40 years. So we were used to inflation running around sort of that 2 to 3% area. It's high, but it is starting to come down. It's past its peak. And by the way, we just got last week, the CPI was at 7.1%, so off of its high, and it actually dropped from 7.1% to 6.5%. That's the headline number. Even the core number without food and energy dropped from 6% down to 5.7%. So we have good news on the CPI front. PCE is another measure that the Fed really likes. It's personal consumption expenditures. It's another measure of inflation. It hasn't dropped quite as much as CPI, but last week the core numbers dropped from 4.7% to 4.4%. Look, there's going to be some big changes this spring. Some of the inflation was running very hot last March, April, and May. And this is going to be what we call a base effect. So these are measured year over to year over. And recently, the numbers haven't been running very high from month to month. So we're going to replace some of those high months that were over 1% inflation growth last spring with lower inflation numbers, maybe being, up 0.1 or 0.2. So this inflation's going to drop very quickly this spring. And we think that inflation will end this year right around 3%. Is that really in the Fed zone? The Fed wants it to be 2%. So it's not quite there yet, but we're on our way. Look, I know we've got some time constraints. That's really the good news that I wanted to tell you. Look, that inverted yield curve tells us we might have a recession. One thing I will tell you is that there are a lot of big firms out there, JP Morgan Chase, Bloomberg Economics. Back in October, at the end of October, their models were saying there's a 98 to 99% chance of recession. But more recently, they've run those models and they're saying, well, there's probably a 60% chance of a recession within the next 12 months. So conditions have really improved. The labor market is still tight, but that drives economic activity. So when you have a high, it's hard to have a recession when you have 3.5% unemployment. It's because people have money and they feel like they can spend when they have jobs. So things are improving, inflation's improving. The Fed's actually done a very good job. They were a little late to the game to get started, but they've actually done a pretty decent job of modifying inflation. And it looks like it's going to end that year around 3%. So that's really good news for the economy. So we're thinking we're going to avoid a recession. The Fed chairman said that as well today. Growth might be slow like it was last year. It might only be 1% GDP growth, but I think people are going to be out there. Employment is good. And that means, I think for Juneau, that people are going to be going on vacation and that you can expect a pretty strong and maybe a record year for people coming up to Juneau traveling, because I think they've got money in their pockets still, and the employment situation is very strong. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically about the portfolio. And then we'll open it up for questions.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you again virtually. I will be brief and just complement some of Dave's comments on page 17. As Dave mentioned, yeah, you'll just want to go to page 17 there, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, sir. As Dave mentioned, there is reason for optimism for the things that he mentioned: low unemployment rate, savings built up, and just a desire to continue to consume services in particular. The challenge, as he highlighted, was that inflation was running way too high. And as a consequence, you had a Federal Reserve that was raising interest rates. And you saw on that very first slide the effect of that yield curve going from a very low level at the end of 2021 to a higher level at the end of 2022. The net effect of that comes through in what's known as total rate of return performance, and that's the change in the price of your portfolio. And you can see through the at the top of this page for the calendar year, December 31, 2022, that adjustment cost the portfolio from a total return perspective minus 5.24%. Now, our passive benchmark returned minus 5.5% for a difference of beating the benchmark of 26 basis points, or around 0.25%. That is primarily our job. Our job is going to be to try and beat that passive benchmark over time. And you can see that we've been able to do that reasonably consistently since the onset of coming on with the city and borough. If you flip to the next page, we asked Mr. Rogers ahead of the meeting today, what things do you want us to cover? So I will tick those off and then we can open it up for questions. His first question was, have losses continued in fiscal year 2023? As you know, your year runs from the end of June to the following June. And the short answer on the left-hand side of the page is yes, they have, but it's stabilized. So what you're seeing here in that light green line is the continuation of the market value of the portfolio, that minus 5% as it was drawing down. You can see it got to a low right around September of this year, and it has since recovered. That dark green line is the book value of the portfolio. We'll call that your principal preservation line. Our job is to make sure that we manage your portfolio in such a way so that we don't crystallize those losses in such a way that jeopardizes the principal of the portfolio. Over time, bonds mature, bonds reprice, and we would expect that green line to converge back up towards that line. So yes, losses have continued, but it has stabilized. The next two questions were around, well, gee, what do we think for the rest of the fiscal year of 23? And then how do we think about the fiscal year of 24? And what we're able to do is take a look at the yield curve and take a look at what the market is offering us and project what the returns would be on the portfolio, holding all things being equal. Now we know things change over time, but what you'll see here on the right-hand side of the page is because we've had such a significant repricing in the market, yields are much higher, and the opportunity set to actually earn positive returns in the portfolio are much better than what they used to be. So if you look at these, well, we'll start at the top on the right-hand side, just to square things up here. So for the fiscal year ending 2021, the portfolio returned positive 0.4%. At the end of last fiscal year, you can see it returned that -5 that I mentioned. And then for the first 6 months of this year, down -0.9. But as that left-hand side of the chart hints towards, we're seeing some stabilization and we're seeing higher yields. And what we're estimating for the balance of this year is a recovery in market value and a net outcome of plus 2.1% for the 12 months ending June of 23. A similar type of approach for the end of 24 at 4.7%. And again, as I mentioned on that previous slide, our job is to even do better than what the market is offering us. So we're going to try and do better than even those numbers there. Finally, and perhaps the best question, was when do we get back to a normal market? And I would argue, and we would argue, that we're a lot closer to a normal market than we have been for a long time. One way of looking at it is through the lens of returns. Short-term fixed income investments typically do not have negative total returns like we experienced over the last 12 to 18 months. As Dave had outlined, we're talking an experience that we haven't seen in 30, 40, 50 years, depending on which lens you look through it. The other lens that you can look through, and we're at higher yields now and fixed income is much more attractive, and you can see that returns are expected to be much more positive. The other lens that you can look at it through is, well, gee, we have central banks that used to be in the business of actually buying bonds and deflating those yields to help us stay out of a deflationary trap, to keep us out of a deflationary environment. It seems like we're going to be a long way from having to go about doing that again. And we're reasonably optimistic that as the cycle matures and as the Fed responds to a maturing cycle and perhaps slowing growth sometime in the future, they won't have to resort to those extraordinary measures. So bottom line, the outlook for fixed income is a lot better. Our job is going to continue to try and exceed what the market is giving us. And we think that we're a lot closer to normal than what we have been in the past. So with that, we'll pause and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Salente and Mr. Whithone. Are there any questions from the committee? Ms. Gladys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on the very top line. Total market value, 158 million.
You're on page.
I'm on your page 17, and also it's on your page. Well, my page 46, the last thing, it adds up to 158-ish million. Could you explain what that number is?
Certainly. So that's the value of the securities that are held in the intermediate term portfolio. If we were going to sell them all today, that's what we would expect to have on the other side in cash.
Sure. I think actually the question is probably for Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, thank you. Member Gladys. So on any given day, CBJ has between 220 and 260-70 million dollars in the bank. And that we follows a very predictable cycle like most municipalities because we take in property tax in every October. The midterm portfolio, we don't move money in or out of. That more midterm portfolio has not had a deposit to it or a withdrawal from it in memory. The reality is that we use other vehicles for managing the rest of our cash. We use, obviously we have a bank, like a checking account, like all of us do, that we use for daily deposits and daily payments. And we also store warehouse money that doesn't move into the midterm portfolio into the Alaska Municipal League investment pool. So we, on a day-to-day basis, are managing how much cash is in AMLIP versus our checking account. And for the most part, when we contracted with Insight Investments, one of the first things I said to them is, I don't think we're ever going to need any of this money back. It has remained true since we've been contracted with them. The thing that would change that, obviously, is the spending down of fund balance in any area, right? So when I say 220 to 260 million dollars in the bank on any given day, that's the combination of the general fund, the hospital's fund balance, the airport's fund balance, the land's fund balance, the affordable housing funds balance. So all of those assets combined are held across a variety of treasury, cash, and investment structures. So, you know, the finance department is broadly split into one big group that thinks about fund balance by fund and one big group that thinks about cash and investable assets by their account.
How do you decide or know? I mean, you need some for the checking account, obviously. What goes to AMLIP? What goes to this? It's just, this is the amount that you think you don't need, or how does that work?
Well, I laugh because Assemblymember Hughes Candies and I are presently working with a consultant who's going to come in and advise us on that. Not so different from your home checking account of, you know, you've got a little bit of money squirreled away in an investment. You got a little bit of money in your savings. You got a little bit of money in your checking account. We need to be able to make payroll. We need to be able to make a $2 or $3 or $4 million payment to a capital project vendor. We have a forecast, a cash flow forecast. We obviously get, we get property tax every October. So that is a wave in the graph. We get sales tax at the end of every quarter when that's filing is due. We obviously know that the certain quarters are bigger than others. Payroll is quite consistent. Payments to vendors tend to peak in the summer. We spend a lot more money in the summer than we do the winter. There's a mechanism by which we cash flow forecast all of that. We try to keep as much money in AMLIP as we can out of our checking account because it's earning us a lot of money there right now.
Any other questions? Okay, I see none. Thank you, gentlemen, for presenting tonight. I know it's late where you are, so we appreciate you joining us via Zoom. Hopefully one of these days you guys will get to come back and visit again.
That would be
But
great.
thank you and
You're welcome.
good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, that brings us to our second agenda topic, or number 3, actually. Separating BRH audit provider. We have a memo in the packet from the BRH board, and we have a memo in the packet from Mr. Rogers. And I did tell Mr. Solomon Gross and Mr. Keith earlier that I would give them the floor for a very short overview. So one or both of you, we've got a microphone with your name on it. That one.
So thank you for the opportunity. I think how I might state this is we have an opportunity, and our board has requested the opportunity to bring on our own auditing firm. From my experience, and I've seen the model, and the model's varied across the country. But typically, from a hospital healthcare perspective, most of my peers and most of the peers that I deal with, and like hospitals, would say having an auditing firm that's more steeped in healthcare and related to other institutions similar to hospitals and healthcare that does hospital work has its advantages. I can't speak to the city side because I don't run a city, never have. And so that's a different perspective. From my perspective, it adds value in a couple ways. One, many auditing firms that do specifically hospitals have specific knowledge about hospitals. They have comparative analytics. They not only do your audit, but they can add value by providing you opportunities to view outlying issues. And we see value in that, and I've had value in that. And more importantly, some firms that have depth in healthcare administration and healthcare services can provide other services. For example, if they found and spot audited and see a problem in our revenue cycle, we could engage them to do revenue cycle analytics, but at the same time, compare us to other like hospitals. We're a sole community hospital. We're prospective payment. And basically, there's not a lot of us in Alaska like this. And so larger auditing firms have access to more information. I think it's a value, and I think our board thinks it's a value having done this. Now, my previous employment, we were a city-owned hospital, and we separated for this very same reason. Good auditing firm for the city, but lacked the depth of expertise we needed to do what we needed in a hospital institution. That was our particular situation there. I'm gathering that our board feels the same way here. We'd like a different auditing firm with bigger scale, more entrenched in healthcare, give us those added value analytics, and give us more of a concierge service for the hospital to meet the board's requests and the board's needs.
Questions, Mr.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm not sure if I have to declare a conflict. I use LG Rayfield for a couple of different entities that I have. And I do active business with them now. Oh, where's Mr. Palmer? There you are. What's the story?
Give me a few minutes to think about that.
A minute.
Me too.
Okay,
Me too.
we'll take a short recess.
Am I the only one that?
Alicia,
Getting on.
To Mr. Palmer. Oh, actually, wait, first we have, Ms. Wall has gotten on a plane, so she's no longer with us. Mr. Palmer.
Sounds great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an interesting predicament, and the short answer is I think anybody who does business with LG Rayfield should declare that and state whether or not you think you can be neutral and fair on this question. And I say that for a few reasons. One, the relationship that individuals have with a business in town usually does not generate a issue for a conflict. However, there's a couple assumptions with that. One, that there's a large number of businesses that you can choose from. And while there's only a small number of auditors in Juneau, you're not limited in your choice of auditors in this state or nationwide. So you have choice. And then the second is that if this is the quid pro quo type of component, that you would need to make sure that any work that LG does for you, you pay fair market value for that, whatever that means. So you're not getting a benefit as being an assembly member making decisions. So kind of with those guiding principles, if there's members who have engaged with LG and their firm, if you just declare such and then state whether or not you think you can be neutral and fair, then it'll be up to the chair and the assembly to overrule or make any decisions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Palmer. We'll go down the line, start with Mr. Bryson.
Madam Chair, I'd like to declare a conflict as I use LG Rayfield. Listening to Mr. Palmer, my concern is I'm never neutral. And hearing his description of that, I'm gonna request that I be recused from this discussion.
Okay, you can go sit in our audience. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to state that I use LG Rayfield both in my personal taxes and business taxes. However, I'm probably more neutral than Mr. Bar. And I actually do believe that I can be neutral and objective in this. And so I request that I remain seated on the assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Anybody else down there? Oh, okay. I thought I saw a whole rush of people. So, okay, that brings us back to questions, and Ms. Hughes Scandies had raised her hand. And Mr. Keith, you might come back up, maybe, depending on the questions.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, all my questions were for Mr. Keith. Sorry. I mean, maybe I'll have additional questions, but they were just for you. So I think if you could, it would be helpful for me if you could speak to, based on the conversation we just had at the tables, at a time when we're in phase 1 and phase 2 of cost cutting, with the potential increased costs to go it alone on an audit and seek out specific services, why you might be thinking about something that could increase costs in spending. And why don't you start there? And I have one more.
Thank you for the question. Well, an audit is not something you want to skimp on costs. Oftentimes, audits will identify opportunities for revenue. It's not just a cost issue. Also, audits find opportunities to avoid cost problems. You know, healthcare auditing and follow-up services is important when you're talking about 340B programs and revenue cycle and things like that. Oftentimes, an auditing firm actually will help you find revenue opportunities and cost avoidance opportunities. Whether or not it costs more, I think it's negligible with regard to the impact, positive impact an auditing firm can have on your business. And something I didn't say earlier, and because I've served 4 hospital boards, but I've also been on other boards on risk reciprocals, et cetera. And it's not an unusual policy to go out and change auditing firms every 3 to 5 years for a fresh set of eyes. I don't know how long the city's had this auditing firm, but if it's over 10 years, you'll find that's an outlier in the healthcare industry. So the churn is often welcome because of the changing environment. And you don't want administration, you don't want your governing boards, and you don't want your auditing firms to get complacent. And sometimes that does happen, unfortunately, in this business.
Follow up. Thank you for that. You sort of started to get into the area of my second question, which is you've mentioned that they might help you. I think you said revenue cycles, or I'm trying to remember the exact terminology you used, but that they might provide insight into some things you might want to change. And so I'm thinking of the relationship we have with our auditor and what I'm thinking about when I'm looking over the city's audit, or we, for instance, this year we looked at the school's audit. My question is, how, if you wanted bias potentially, or you think there's insight to be gained from that, how can the auditor then be considered an independent auditor if at the same time they're providing you with financial advice?
Well, most auditing firms confirm that they're independent and they do their management letters. They do all the due diligence up front. But the reality is they can help identify and spot problems, and usually different parts of auditing firms or companies come in and do specialty services. So for example, if they looked at our audit and they see a bad debt problem and we're an outlier and we're unique compared to 25, 30 other similar hospitals, they will bring that to our attention. And we can either solicit them to come in and help us fix the problem, or we can solicit somebody else. It's totally our choice. So I think it's a matter of deeper experience and probably more rich analytics and comparison opportunities for a different auditor. And again, changing your auditor in healthcare is more normal than an outlier. So again, you'll probably see most healthcare entities change their auditing firms over time, and they're not set in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Ms. Gladaszewski followed by Madam Mayor, and Ms. Hale, were you just alerting me to the mic, or did you want to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for either Mr. Keith or Mr. Rogers. I understand that there was a solicitation for this service, and CBJ signed a contract for 3 years for this particular auditor. So it went through a solicitation, RFP, right? And so we're in the second year. So there's 1 more year of this contract. So the question, are you asking to do this at the end of this contract? And in that case, I don't have any problem with it because I can understand your point.
Right.
But we do have a commitment, and they won the bid fair and square. And I don't know of anything that would cause us to sever that contract. So again, are you asking for now or for in a year from now? I personally don't have a problem. Now I do. So I want to just be clear what you're asking.
Well, I thank you for that question. Again, the discussions were happening before I was brought into this issue. And I think it would be reasonable to go back to our board and say, if it truly is 1 year left on the agreement, we probably ought to honor our obligation. But at least now we've brought it to your attention that we would like to address this in the future years. I am unfamiliar with the term of the audit.
Is that correct, Mr. Rogers? Did I characterize that correctly? There's another year.
Assemblymember Gladaszewski, no, not exactly. So a little clarification. I'm actually unsure why we structured the contract this way. But we structured a 3-year engagement that was a firm first year and then an optional second year, an optional third year. We may have done that because it gives us the greatest possible flexibility. I do believe that it is not in any way inappropriate for us to not exercise this third optional year of the contract. I will say it introduces a little bit of complexity because if the hospital were to seek an independent audit, CBJ and the school district would need to either mutually renegotiate from the previous competitive solicitation with LG Rayfeld to conduct our audits independently. So there's a little bit complicated mechanics, but I do not, per Mr. Keith's comments, there's nothing untoward necessarily about indicating to LG Rayfeld that we would not exercise the third optional year of the contract.
But if I follow up, would it be just the third year of their part? I mean, how complicated is that? But we would stay for the next year to explain that. How would that work?
That would have to be negotiated with the vendor.
Okay, when we're done with ask.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. And that was actually part of my question too. But my next question is, if we did split, what's going to be I know you said there might be a difference in cost. Do we have a ballpark figure of that? Is it going to be huge, little? What's going to be the difference in cost if we split?
I can only speculate, Madam Mayor. I think that there's a possibility that the additional costs for the school district and CBJ would be commensurate with our portion of the combined cost. Have to imagine or speculate that the hospital will see a significant cost increase. I mean, sharing 1/3, something like 1/3 of our audit engagement today is probably far less than they will spend on an independent audit. I don't know that. That's purely speculation, but I think logic would lead us to that result.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Keith, I hear and kind of understand this, comparative analytics and whatever data that can be gleaned from, but I guess my question is, could not another company use the audit data to provide those analytics? And is getting a new auditor, I mean, is it a lot more work? And I mean, no offense, I mean, you have a lot of work already.
Thank you for the question. It would be my opinion that having an audit firm doing the audit and then bringing in another consultant to figure out what the problems are would actually be more expensive. Having an audit firm that knows your finances, has engaged with your board, our board at BRH, understands administrations and has a relationship is added value, at least for a CEO. So from my perspective, and probably for Sam Muse's perspective, having an audit firm that's specific to the hospital actually is more meaningful to us and probably will be more fruitful for us in the long run.
Follow up.
Sorry, I should ask this just clearly. And maybe you can answer too, Mr. Rogers. Pulling in a new auditor, I mean, there is additional time and work and effort that goes into that versus an existing one, or I don't know. I should probably read the audit.
My only answer is audit work is audit work. It has to be done regardless of who our auditors are. It's always a lot of work and it's important work.
Mayor Weldon.
I'll attempt a motion and see what happens. I'm kind of playing off what Ms. Gladaszewski was saying, and I think LG Rayfield has served us well. So my motion would be to let them finish out their contract with them, and then this year, as we let that finish out, to allow Bartlett to seek separate auditation. I don't know the right word. A separate audit. So, and before we vote on that, I just want to applaud all auditors because it would be a job I would not like.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Seems like we're all on a page at least to finish out this year, so that's good. I'm objecting. Yeah, sorry. I should have said that. I object. To speak to that further, I'm glad we're all on a page in that regard, so I don't think this is the worst motion. I do think there's no harm, given the stark numbers that I saw earlier and some of our other enterprises that we have in the city that have some rockiness, to revisit this in a year. I wouldn't want to give a go ahead now. I'd like to see how the hospital is doing in 6 months or how they're doing in a year and revisit it then. So I would make an amendment to let this auditing continue with our joint agreement that we've negotiated already, and have the Bartlett board come back to see us, which we will anyway, within a year.
Mayor Weldon.
Jack, for purposes of a question, how much time does it take for the hospital or whomever to figure out I don't know, a solicitation bid or whatever. I mean, are we screwing up a timeline if we let this one play out and then asking you at the last minute to go ahead?
You know, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure. That may be a question for Mr. Palmer because we'd have to go through a process and or Jeff. And I don't know what that process would look like, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Keith. I think what we would, I think if I'm taking stock of what the direction is. So first in my memo, I've suggested, I think the code compels us to involve the assembly more significantly than we have in selecting the city's auditor. I think what we would do in a practical sense is that we would launch one solicitation and we would structure that solicitation for auditing services in such a way that an auditor could bid on all three entities to be audited or to bid on just the city and the school district or on just the hospital. And we would do that in such a way that we would give, you know, every auditor a sort of equal opportunity to bid separately on the hospital, to bid on the entire package, or to bid only on CBJ and the school district. And then a review panel will look at those proposals and figure out what is in the best interest of both the city and the school district and the hospital. And that's a little complex to do, but we run complex procurements all the time. So that process would likely start about a year from now. We want to have an auditor in place by April, May, something, and this is about the right timing. So about this time of the year, next year, we would launch that process. I think it's certainly possible for us to make a note to bring it back to the Assembly Finance Committee for a discussion at that time about whether you do want an allowance for an auditor to bid separately on the hospital from the school district and CBJ proper.
Okay, I have Ms. Hale, Ms.
follow-up.
Vesh,
I have a
follow
que-
up, and then
I have a
Ms. Hale, and
question.
then Ms.
I have a follow-up. So is Ms. Hughes Gandy's, is that your intention of what Mr. Rogers said?
Yeah, that sounds agreeable.
And I'll remove my objection.
Okay, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if I have an objection or not because I'm a little bit confused and I'm wondering if we could speak in fiscal years rather than this year, next year kind of thing. And perhaps I can ask a question. Is it the case that the FY 22 audit was the first year? Or is the FY 23 audit the first year? Or is the FY 21 audit the first year?
Yeah.
Member Hale, you hit it the last one, the FY 21 audit. This is complicated. The FY 21 fiscal year audit, which would have been presented to you last year, was the first year. The FY 22 fiscal year audit, which will be presented to you now, is the second year. The FY 23 fiscal year, which is the year we are in, will be presented to you a year from now. That is the end of the contract. So what we would be rebidding is the audit of FY 24 through FY 25 and 26. And we would begin that bidding process this time next year.
So when does the FY 23 audit work begin?
Yeah, thank you. It's only Member Hale. Audit work typically begins preceding the end of the fiscal year. We begin discussions. Frankly, because we've had some challenges with the FY 22 audit, I will keep engaging with LG Rayfeld through the spring in preparation for the FY 23 audit. The audit work performed by our auditor happens from as early as maybe May all the way through December, January the following year.
Okay, so FY 21 audit is done, but shouldn't FY 22 audit be done already then too?
The auditor is working on the FY 2 audit 22 right now, and I would hope to have it in front of this committee in the March AFC meeting.
I think we had an update on that at our last finance committee.
Yeah, we're a
little.
I'm glad you remember that. Okay, that sounds really good. So really, all we're talking about is the FY 23 is the third year.
Right.
And it's very doubtful that anyone would be able to get anything in place early enough to have another firm do FY 23. So the motion then is to open up the bid beginning in FY 24, which would be a new bid. A new.
We have an amendment and that's what I want to ask about.
Well, okay, but So I actually didn't understand the mayor's motion and I didn't understand Ms. Huskandi's motion. So I'm just trying to understand what we're talking about.
Can I ask about the amendment? Maybe it will.
Is Mayor Weldon's motion, I think, was to approve now that at FY 24, we could do a separate
Bartlett could do the
bid. And Ms. Huskandi's amendment is to say, don't approve that now, bring it back to us at the appropriate time, which is probably about a year from now. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's what, can I clarify about, that's, so it's the amendment that I want to clarify. What Mr. Rogers said was he would split it. And what you're saying is you want to approve it before he splits it. And so that's right. And so
Yes, and I
that's what
should clarify that.
That's
when
what I
she
want to
said-
know when that is. When is when does the solicitation go out for the FY 24 audit? And then before that is when Ms. Huskandi's wants it to come back here. So that's what I'm trying to clarify when that is.
I would believe that we would be putting out a solicitation about a year from now. So I think the Assembly Finance Committee would expect to see it probably in the January meeting. If we felt that there was that time mattered, we may back it up to December, but there's obviously a lot of other things in December. But I think a January discussion of whether the Assembly was principally supportive of the possibility of bidding the contract in a way that we could have two separate auditors, with that discussion could happen in January. I think it still gives us plenty of time to work through the solicitation and award one or more auditors in time for them to begin their field work in May.
But then
We should probably have that.
Ms. Huskandi's would need to hear from the hospital before January. That's what I'm trying to figure out. When does the hospital have to come back before?
Well, we are supposed to have a joint meeting with the hospital in January anyway, so it's good timing.
And I'll add that we have a memo in our packet from Mr. Keith or Mr. Solomon Gross, and we have a memo in our packet from Mr. Rogers, and that would be sufficient to me. Just to revisit it like this, they can come to the Finance Committee. I'm not saying we have to have the hospital board. I'm just saying, let's let some time elapse and revisit because they have a lot on their plate.
Okay.
Okay, I support Ms.
wait.
Huskandi's motion.
Okay. We're gonna raise our hands. Mayor Weldon and then Ms. Hale.
Okay, I thought I got it, but then when Mr. Rogers spoke, I'm totally confused now. Okay, so the 22 audit should be done. But you're saying we wouldn't be coming back till next year. So that's January of 2024, and the 23 audit would be already on its way, should already be done. So it seems to me like, okay, I guess I'm talking into the, okay.
The FY 23 audit should be complete by.
And the audit for FY 24 would be starting probably, I think you said the end, so like June of 23.
Generally May, June is what.
Of 24, I'm sorry. So, okay.
Ms. Hale.
I object. I am concerned that we're doing what we do so often and we're going to create rework. So we'd all have to revisit this and we'd all have to really think hard and we'd have to try to understand it again. And obviously it's been a little bit difficult to understand right now. So my inclination would be to go with the kind of bid package that Mr. Roger described where they're split out. And not have to come back and make this decision again.
Okay. Mr. Keith.
What I'm hearing from Mr. Rogers, he's building in flexibility. And I think that's very positive because it gives he representing the city and me representing BRH the opportunity to have some flexibility in making the decision and it could work in the favor of both of us, is what I'm hearing. My board wants their own auditing firm. And if Mr. Rogers can do it in such a way that the board can have their choice of their audit firm, and he can do it in such a way that it would benefit the city as well, I think that's a very powerful way to do this. And it sounds complicated, but I've been through these things before, and I think it's doable.
Mr. Rogers, presumably the fact that you're going out you're doing a solicitation for a new auditor is going to come to the finance committee anyway, regardless of whether we do this. I mean, you said that we're supposed to be involved in the choice of the audit firm, so I would hope that we would be informed of that solicitation process.
Chair Treem, you haven't been in the past, which I think I think staff have been remiss about. I don't think there was any ill intention. But I do think that the code points to the assembly itself being directly engaged in the selection of our auditor. What I propose to you is that yourself as the finance chair would sit on a proposal review committee, and that after you and staff had made a decision about advancing the most competitive proposal that we've received, the assembly would endorse that choice. But I don't know that I would, absent direction, I don't know that I would plan to come back to the finance committee to tell you we're launching a solicitation.
Okay. Ms. Hughes Candies and then Mayor Weldon.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just say one more thing and then, the assembly can decide, because I think everyone's wrapped their heads around it now. I just cannot think of anything that could be more important in terms of work. I agree, we're guilty of making work for ourselves sometimes, or overcomplicating things and getting into the weeds. But our community hospital is such a stabilizing force in our community, and tons of people wouldn't live here if we didn't have this community, or if we didn't have this hospital. So if the hospital is one where we get a little bit more into the weeds, or, it was mentioned earlier, they've had a tremendous amount of turnover and made it through a pandemic. So I for one, am very comfortable watching the hospital very closely, because I think that's our fiduciary duty, but I'll leave it there.
Mayor Weldon.
So I thought I had this, my head wrapped around this. I got the dates down right, but something Ms. Hale said concerns me, because I liked what Mr. Rogers said. I like the flexibility right there that Mr. Keith pointed out, and it doesn't sound like your motion allows that flexibility. It sounds like we're going to revisit the subject. And so if that's what the motion actually says, I would object.
Mr. Smith.
What does the motion actually say?
Ms. Hughes Candies, would you like me to try? No, you can try.
I'll take a stab. Mayor Weldon made a motion to let them go forth and do. After once we split up, to let them go their own way. Mr. Rogers proposed that he could structure a procurement that would allow for bidding on one or all. I propose that we check in and see how Bartlett Hospital is doing financially, and then decide whether we want to split that up. And maybe I'll even, and that's a motion. And then I'll parentheses say, and we might want to see how this city is doing financially as we consider economies of scale.
Is there clarity on the amendment? Mr. Smith?
I think I understand it. I mean, in my mind, I'm trying to think of it more as in a year, staff will bring back to the Assembly Finance Committee this issue again to determine, for starting with the FY24 audit, do we issue it as a single procurement for one auditor for all three of these auditable entities, or do we divide? So I'm striking from my mind the check in on the finances thing, because we can check anyway. But so that's more what I was hearing, or that's more what I'm envisioning as the motion.
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, that's a
is that
fair way
okay?
of saying it,
Okay.
but I would be personally making that decision based
Okay.
on how they finance it.
Sure. Okay. With that, I think I'm supportive of doing that. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Spiegel, are you clear on what we're talking about? That's probably the most important question.
Thank
Who
you. Chair
cares? If
Green.
we know, we need you to know.
I will repeat what my understanding is of the amendment back to you, and you can tell me if it's on point. The amendment is to continue with the LG Rayfield contract through the third year, finish that up. and have the Bartlett board come back to the assembly to discuss this concept with the assembly approving the solicitation of separate components of the audit prior to going forward and doing so. Is that correct?
I would say it doesn't even need to be the whole board. Staff can bring it back and the hospital staff can come.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. We have amendment, we have objection. Is that correct? Okay. Can you call our roll, please? Assemblymember Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Assemblymember Hale,
No.
Assemblymember Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Walden.
No.
Assemblymember Gladysevsky,
Yes.
Chair Trim.
Yes.
Motion fails, 4 ayes, 2 nays.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to amend my motion to state that we finish out the contract with LG Rayfield and we use Mr. Rogers' flexible plan as when the time arises and he brings it forward to us. Or he brings, well, it's eventually supposed to come, well, no, it's not supposed to come with it. And we use his flexible plan. And we'll leave it at that.
Mr. Palmer, are we kosher here? Okay. Okay, we've heard this motion with this amendment. Is there objection to this one? Yes. Oh, she did say, but you did say I want to amend the motion. You made a new motion. Okay. Okay, new motion. No objection, maybe objection, Mr. Smith.
So now we are essentially saying, yes, we want to go into a more flexible procurement, starting with the FY24 audit.
Correct.
Well, I kind of object, actually. I'm fine to do, I'd like to think about it a little more and see it later, so I'll object.
Okay, that's. Let me ask a clarifying question of Mr. Rogers. Presumably, if you do this flexible procurement, a decision has to be made at some point. Who in the current process would make that decision?
Chair Trim, in the current process, absent direction from the assembly, I would probably make that decision. I guess I should say I don't make decisions absent feedback from our client departments about what serves them well. But absent assembly direction, we would solicit audit services in the way that we think is in the best interests of the borough.
Mr. Smith?
I guess the reason I'm objecting to that is we don't know what the additional costs would be. I mean, I feel like there's unanswered questions that I'm not willing to say, yes, go forward and do procurement, where I imagine in 9 to 11 months time, we would probably have more meat on the bones for this type of thing. So that's why I'm not saying, yes, go forth. So counting with 6 is fun though.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith, Ms. Hale, and then Ms. Gladysevsky.
I think Ms. Gladysevsky was before me.
Ms. Gladysevsky.
I just, the consequences of this failing is that nothing changes, correct?
Unless we make a different decision in the next year.
So
We have probably 10 months to make a different decision.
Chair Trim, let me just be bold and say, given tonight's conversation, I think it's unlikely that the finance department would proceed for a solicitation for the next auditor without coming back to the Assembly Finance Committee.
So,
In some dimension.
and I want to remind the assembly that the audit firm, whichever one we choose, works for us, the 9 of us, and does not work for staff. So I don't want to leave that decision up to staff. I don't think our staff would do that. I think they would definitely come back and get our input, but I think we should not give that up because it is actually our job.
Right. And so I'd just say, so if the consequences are, as I said, then I think I will vote no, and then we'll talk about it again, I guess.
Ms. Hale.
Two points. One is a question to Mr. Palmer, which is it true that this assembly, this seated assembly, won't be able to vote on this again while we are seated as this assembly? And or do we have, or will the next assembly be able to vote on this? That's my first question.
I think the only person smiling tonight is Mr. Watt because he doesn't have to talk.
You could just stay up here.
I guess my seat is going to be over there for the rest of the night. So Ms. Hale, thank you. We're in a little bit of a quagmire. And I think the salient point here is maybe regardless of what the vote outcome is tonight, the message and the direction for Mr. Rogers is that the finance director needs to come back and present some new plan in 9-ish months back to the finance committee, regardless of the outcome.
Good answer. Thank you. And I do have, it's not a follow-up, it's just another point. I would just remind the assembly that none of us, well, maybe some of us, but most of us at least, have no idea how much the audit costs. We don't get into that level of detail because we trust our capable finance director to do that job. And that is his job. And we don't meddle with that because we don't have the ability to do that. And it doesn't make sense for us to be micromanaging at that level. So I also would say that our auditing firm has done a really good job, and they have revealed issues with Bartlett finances, and they've revealed issues with school district finances that were extremely helpful to the assembly and to those boards to find out. So that is their job. Their job is not to keep any of the entities financially stable. Those are different. The finances and how a company or an entity is doing financially is different than the auditing. So I just wanted to make those points. I think we're way too far in the weeds on this personally. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon and then Mr. Smith.
I'll pass.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Just on that, I hear what you're saying. I hear what Ms. Hale is saying. I think, however, if we are changing the status quo, I want to know what the potential for the fiscal impact of doing that is. So that's why I'm saying this. I mean, there's 6 of us here. We need 5 votes to do any. We are struggling for that. Would people be, can I move to table this until December or until the later year? Is that motion in order? So that we don't have to vote it down and maybe never be able to speak about it again.
Through the chair, yes, that is a priority motion that is higher than the underlying motion. So what I heard was postpone until
December, January finance meeting, or as deemed appropriate by the finance director. Resume this discussion, hopefully when we have 9 people here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Any objection to Mr. Smith's motion? Seeing none. Thank you for that, Mr. Smith.
Chair.
Mr. Rogers.
With thank you, just to the indulgence. So with the motion out of the way, I don't want to confuse things. I think that the question that's more at the heart of this than I think we may mischaracterize this as the hospital wanting to pick a different shiny vehicle than we want to pick, right? And that's not the way that government procurement works. So government procurement is essentially about defining a scope of work of services that we want to procure and then launching a solicitation that allows robust and fair competition in the marketplace. So I think that the thing that the finance department will need to work with the hospital on in partnership is defining a scope of work that serves them, right? And I think maybe that's gotten lost in this a little bit. I think what the hospital has said is not that they have an issue with our current auditor. Well, that's not the issue. I mean, the issue is that the hospital is saying that they are desiring a slightly different scope of services and maybe different qualifications, right? So we will look at scope and qualifications in concert, in partnership with the hospital into late next year. And I think that's probably the thing that we bring back to the Assembly Finance Committee and say, are you comfortable with staff seeking an auditor on your behalf with a slightly different set scope and required qualifications for a future auditor, which will be together with the conversation about, do we need one auditor? Do we need more, right? So I think that there's the result that whether we need one auditor or two or three will be the question of, can one company provide the scope of services we need, and can they competitively win that as part of our business? So I didn't want to get that lost in this conversation. This is really not about one auditor or two. It's really about, we need to define a scope of services and qualifications that meet the hospital's needs, and then we will launch into the marketplace fair competition.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And I do want to say, having only as finance chair worked with one auditing firm, they are available to us if you want to learn more about audits. It's actually pretty interesting. And I bet Karen would do a one-on-one with anybody who is interested. Okay. Small break? Sure. Small break. We are back. We have no more decisions we have to make tonight. 50 minutes until my bedtime alarm goes off.
You can do it.
We're gonna power through. Next on the agenda is the annual insurance and risk update. Mr. Rogers, do you want to kick us off?
Chair Treem, I will only kick us off by introducing Chelsea Swick. Is this the first time, Chelsea, that you've been in front of the committee? So Ms. Swick has been in the risk manager role now for a number of months, but not quite a year, and is going to present the annual risk fund and risk management overview for the first time. So Ms. Swick, welcome to the Finance Committee, and I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you so much. Jeff said, my name is Chelsea Swick, and I took over for Jennifer Mannix, and I'm going to be presenting on the risk management program. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me throughout the presentation. When you think of our self-insured, our insurance plans, we have our self-insured policies and our fully insured policies. I think of these programs as semi-self-insured. We have insurance on much higher levels for high cost claims. Our self-insured program includes our health benefits, general and auto liability, employment practices, and our workers' compensation. Our fully insured program covers our property, airport, docks and harbors, Bartlett, Ucrest, and the fire station. Among these higher level insurance policies, we have various smaller ones that cover different pieces here and there within the city. One of the bigger takeaways from this is our property insurance program. We do have a $500,000 deductible with that, meaning we're paying $500,000 out of pocket until insurance kicks in. That has gone up significantly. So not last year, but the year before last, it was $100,000 deductible. And later in this presentation, I'll kind of speak to the whys of why we're seeing these increases in rates and premiums and whatnot. This slide is an overview of our insurance premium breakdown amongst our bigger policies. As you can see, our property premiums are the highest cost drivers. Aside from the policies outlined here, again, we have much smaller dollar value policies, but essentially CBJ is insuring roughly $1.2 billion worth of assets to some extent. Okay, so in looking at our cost drivers for our insurance policy premiums, we're going to look at cause and effect. Nationwide disasters. So wildfires, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes. All of these things drive insurance rates on a national level. And unfortunately, it's not by region. Inflation. The state of the economy plays a role in the fluctuation of our insurance rates, the increase in home prices, supply chain disruptions, and increased production costs. High dollar claims. This has a direct impact on our premiums and our rates. So for example, the Riverbend School flood, that claim came out to be roughly $5 million. And when our insurance policy takes hits to that extent, we can expect a higher premium increase. And if we keep having more claims in that manner, we can expect a higher deductible. So that $500,000 deductible could potentially be $1 million. And I do know that insurers are talking about that. And depending on how the market trends, we could see that in the future. And we are in a hard market at the moment. In the next slide, I'll explain what this means for shopping the market for insurance policies and what this means for the CBJ. We're currently in.
So just pause to clarify. Yeah, it's in the new packet. So there was a supplemental item that was just an updated presentation. So if you don't have that, that's what you're looking for. It's on the screen.
We are currently in the longest running hard market that we've seen in the past 30 years, and we are going on 3 years. Typically a hard market ranges between 12 and 18 months. And what does this mean for us? Tougher underwriting, meaning insurance companies perform their own risk analysis when deciding if and how much they will provide in insurance. And in today's market trends, underwriters are much more conservative with what and for how much they are willing to provide in insurance. We're seeing a reduced capacity within our policies, and we're seeing more restrictive coverage. When we get our insurance policies, we are seeing more often than not exclusions amongst all of our policies, and it's becoming more and more common to see that list grow and grow.
We have a question from Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, it was a Swick? Swick, thank you. How long are we predicting this hard market?
Through the chair. Thank you, Mayor Weldon. So that is a very difficult question to answer. As of right now, unfortunately, they do not see a tipping point of transitioning into that soft market until, and I'll speak to it, I believe, maybe in another slide or two. But until we see some of these the economy and inflation, natural disasters, which those are unpredictable. So we can't really do anything about that. We're not going to see any changes. Okay. This graph is an overview of our property casualty program insurance premium trend. I just listed the 4 bigger ones: property, excess liability, workers' comp, and special policies. But the point of this graph was to show the upward trend that we're seeing in insurance premiums. And until we transition into that softer market, we're going to keep seeing that upward trend. I also think that it's important to be realistic and look to see that rates stay consistent and not decrease. It's said that when you transition into a softer market, you'll see a rate decrease. And in all of my years in insurance, it is pretty rare that you see a decrease. So in staying consistent, that's the end goal instead of those rate hikes.
We've got some questions. We've got Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Gladys.
So I take it that we've looked at all the different possibilities of like insurance structures. Like I'm not an expert, but I know that I've got different layers of insurance. I have like an umbrella policy and then I have property. But I found that if I work with like the same carrier, I can get advantages. The other strategy that I've employed is I've raised my premiums to as high a level as can be tolerated. Well, have we looked at what rates might be if we took our property insurance with took it from 500 to $1 million deductible? What that would do to our rates? We obviously have a market where we're holding millions of dollars of cash. So if we went from a $500,000 deductible to the $1 million deductible, we keep a little bit more long-term savings to accommodate that. But what kind of rate savings, or have you looked at these different components that I've been mentioning to figure out if there were efficiencies or cost savings or ways that we could restructure our insurance, anything to figure out a way to spend less money on insurance?
Absolutely. Thank you, Assemblymember Bryson. Through the chair, I would like to speak to that question and say that we have a very good working relationship with our insurance brokers. We use Alliant Insurance, and I have a team of brokers that I work with constantly in shopping the market for the different insurance policies to fit our various CBJ programs. Not only are they looking for the best rates, but the best premiums and the best fit for all of our different facilities, our different programs, our different projects. Also, in terms of increasing our deductibles to say $1 million, at what point, so we pay, I think, $3.7 million in insurance premiums. At what point do we become fully self-insured, I guess, is the question that I would ask with regards to that. So I'm unsure. I think it's definitely a valid question for on a much higher level. I do think with our brokers, they also specialize in working with insuring municipalities and all over the West Coast. So I do trust their judgment, and also to know in this hard market, we don't have the options of insurance policies that we once did 5, 6, 7 years ago. We get maybe 2. And even then for our property insurance, we had 1. And that was all. We could either take that coverage or we could leave it, and we would become self-insured at that point, fully self-insured with no deductible to cover us in any way. And like you had said, with different levels of insurance, I have a really good slide that kind of outlines, there is no one insurance company that will insure everything for you to get a better rate when it's on the level of municipality with so many different entities. We buy multiple levels of insurance to try and adequately provide enough coverage for everything that CBJ owns.
Mr. Watt wants a chance to speak tonight, finally.
Testing. Thank you, Chair. We think about this a lot. It's obviously a huge part of the budget, and when we roll the budget out, the insurance costs at the departments, everybody looks at it and says, we have to pay that. It doesn't matter if it's an internal department or an external entity like the school district, but know this, take the school district. Our facilities are getting older. We're not doing big renovation projects. We're more at risk on school facilities. Across the board, we are having employers that are shorter tenured employees are spending more time learning. And part of that learning is making mistakes, breaking things. We have a lot of exposure. And I think this is like another area where our employment trending probably hurts us. But we do think about this a lot, and we do think about, what's the point if our deductible gets so high that we're just paying claims out. But I don't think we're to the point where we would want to be holding the bag completely on our own.
Question?
How often have we in the last 5 years had a claim that exceeded $1 million.
I'm gonna split hairs because there's definitely differences between a claim and a claim that we've paid.
How many times would we need an insurance? Maybe that was how many times we have needed to employ an insurance claim?
We have invoked our insurance rights multiple times a year.
Oh. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Glatchewski, you had a question?
No, I was trying to. No, I think that's the micro details. I just want to know that you all are working on it and deciding whether when these bars get too big, that we should do something else. Cause it looks pretty big from the bars.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I made little lines on the bars so I could follow the bars.
Yeah.
Bad.
Because she is very nerdy. It's
Okay.
bad.
Guys, I know that this is like our 12th hour of meeting and we're getting squirrely, but I want to get out of here. So let's stay focused and keep moving.
All right, this next slide gives an overview of our FY23 risk fund budgeted expenditures. The risk fund is a pretty significant fund with our health benefits consuming most of it at 24.8 million. And the risk fund expenditures, this is everything that we pay for as a self-insured entity, and it's coming out of our fund. The health fund, unfortunately, I don't have a graph that is showing it bar wise to kind of chart it, but as we continually see the cost of healthcare increasing, we're going to see that aspect of the fund increase as well. This is the slide that talks about our different levels of insurance for different entities within the CBJ. This slide is a general overview. The next one pulls one piece out that we can kind of zoom in on. I know it's really small writing, but in giving a breakdown just on this slide, the yellow bar you see is our deductibles. If you go up one, that's our first line of insurance. And once we have exhausted all of that, we go into our next tier of insurance. And as you can see for, airport, marine insurance program, all of them have different tiers and different levels of coverage that we're able to find and shop in the market. And within the next slide, I can detail the airport insurance policy. Sorry, Bartlett, it is late. So in looking at the yellow bar, we have $100,000 deductible with a $300,000 aggregate. Once we pay those deductibles and we have a very high level claim, we have our first line of insurance. And this gives us $1 million in insurance to utilize with a $3 million aggregate. And if that's still not enough to cover that claim, to our secondary or excess of that. And that would provide an additional $4 million. For Bartlett in total, we have between all of our tiers of insurance, $5 million per claim available in insurance with a $10 million aggregate. And so again, when we're shopping that market, we're looking at the first line of insurance. And if that's not enough to adequately cover us, we're going to keep shopping for those higher level policies.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I hope, I just wanted to ask, just to confirm, like for a city our size that deals with the activities that we do, I mean, you obviously are thinking about insurance all the time. I'm just confirming that like we are within insurance best practices and appropriate levels of coverage. I mean, the fact that, yeah, it's not like we're going to hopefully something hasn't happened that's gonna, you know, we're not gonna bankrupt or something off something that's probable to happen or something. Confirming that.
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Smith. Through the chair, I would like to address that by saying, absolutely. But again, we're running into that hard market scenario. The policies that we used to be able to pick and choose, we don't have that anymore. So what insurance gives us, we again are taking it or leaving it. And when I say the market is shopped heavily, it is scoured these days. And especially for self-insured entities, the insurance companies have a monopoly on the market, and they can require the policies that they offer. It's in their best interest to require those $500,000, $1 million deductibles because they know there's nothing else out there. Yeah.
And Ms. Hughes Candies has a question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to kind of follow up on Mr. Smith. For some of these special, I should have asked this when we were talking about the not self-insured portion of our insurance, but I'll use cybersecurity as like an example. Knowing that it's in the insurance company's benefit to not pay if you're not meeting certain conditions when they're examining a claim. Is that a large part of what risk management does? Are we carefully reviewing and making sure that all of our policies within CBJ are following the best practices of all our different policies?
Absolutely. Thank you, Assemblymember Hughes Candace. Through the chair, so in working with Alliant or insurance brokers, I look at this as like our checks and balances. While I like to think of myself as an expert in all things insurance related, they are the gurus. They know the ins and outs of all of our policies. And so some of these policies are hundreds of pages, and we have dozens of policies. And so when I know that a claim is going to hit the risk management department and it's going to exceed the $250,000 deductible for our general liability or the $500,000 deductible for our property insurance, I'll take it to our brokers and say, listen, I think it applies to this policy, and let's look at this. And we really dig into the policies and we see where it can be applied, if it can. And that's a really important part of having a great working relationship with our brokers and our adjusters and our insurance carriers, because when you have that solid working relationship, they really bend over backwards for you and trying to get you the money that they can out of the insurance policies that you pay for.
Love it.
Okay. All right, our health benefits program. This is a self-insured plan. And again, this is another one that I like to think of as semi-self-insured, and we'll get to that in a second. But we had 23.3 million FY23 budgeted expenditures. 1.8 million of those costs went over our stop loss. And our stop loss is another fancy word for a deductible, single incident retention. Once we hit that level, Premera, our health insurance carrier, kicks in on the insurance level. Currently, our self-insured retention per claim is $275,000, and that has gone up from $250,000 last year. Again, and I think hard market is the trend. We're going to see that increasing, maybe not next year, but the year after. And with the cost of health continually increasing, I really don't intend to see that go down. Consistent would be nice though. Our health benefits program ensures 1,080 CBJ, Bartlett, and school district employees for a total of 2,535 covered lives. And I think that's pretty significant. Our health self-insured fund covers actual claims costs, administrative fees, consultants, and our stop loss insurance. All right, this table is an overview of our CBJ health claims trend. And this is on a per claims basis. So you can see in 2012, the average per claim, dollar amount per claim was $1,300 roughly. And for 2021, 2022, we're sitting at about $1,600. Considering the length of time and what's happened with the economy and the market, I don't think that's really too significant of an increase. I think that's really to be expected. Some of those major cost drivers for these claims are cancers, heart attacks, NICUs, the single member high dollar amount health costs. It's also important to note that we are still below the national average trend in dollar amounts per claim. So we're doing something right. And later I'll talk about some of the different programs that we have in place to keep us on this trend. All right, our primary healthcare cost drivers. So in this table, it just gives a brief overview of the different procedures that are utilized by the health members. A really interesting statistic is 2.4% of members drive 47.6% of the costs within our health insurance plan.
Do we have statistics on rock climbing injuries? Is that a category?
They're up this year.
CBJ's created a wellness program in an effort to keep the other 93% of members out of those high cost driving groups. Our health benefits cost containment efforts includes ongoing communication with Premera and Aon. Aon is our benefits consultant, and between our staff and Aon, we are continuing to search for cost saving opportunities. Our health benefits is a self-insured plan, and this allows more control and flexibility and creativity. We're able to create a fully customizable plan for our members, given where we live and type of work and what fits for CBJ. We are promoting medical consumerism and educating our members. And our wellness program promotes healthier lifestyles and focuses on highest cost drivers. I think our wellness program is pretty important, and I think a good amount of our employees really enjoy it. And we've definitely seen the positive effects of having this program. The goal of the wellness program is to provide services that will assist employees to lead healthier lives, promote well-being and avoid illnesses and injuries, improve productivity and morale in the workplace. And it also provides discounts, pool, field house, and ice rink, so people can continue their active lifestyles. We have a wellness coordinator that works directly with the CBJ Bartlett and a very small group of Juneau School District employees. And they provide wellness activities, educational sessions, and assessments. There's wellness challenges, classes, cooking classes, summer hikes, equipment lending, rental programs for various activities. And overall, it's just a really great program that we offer to our employees. This table outlines our property casualty program FY23 and proposed FY24 revenues. When you think of revenues, this is the rates that risk charges other departments to pay into the risk fund and be part of this self-insured entity. What I wanted to outline here is within our property program, we're still seeing that upward trend. And I think that's going to be the theme for a little while.
I have a question. I'm not sure to whom. How does the allocation to the school district happen? I know that that's become a big part of their budget that we cannot fund outside the cap. Can we change the allocation, the amount that we allocate to them?
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is no. I mean, any cost that accrues to the education function must be charged to the education function. Even if CBJ was to subsidize it somehow, it would be considered funding inside the cap. There's no way to shift costs off of the school district in such a way to subvert what is intended to be a statutory cap on the amount of money that a community can spend on education,
Dang it.
including insurance.
Okay. Mr. Palmer.
I'll give you a little bit more comfort on this one. The school district explored the idea of getting their own private insurance policies instead of bundling it with the CBJ. And it resulted in much higher numbers than the value they're getting with us. And so this is the best deal right now available to the school district.
Okay.
All right, this is a general liability and auto claims experience. So we're not doing too bad from FY 18 to FY 22. I do want to make note, this program has a $250,000 SIR, single incident retention. That is our deductible. So when we have a claim, we're paying out of pocket that $250,000 and then insurance kicks in. But again, that's going to $350,000. Higher claims affect this, and in FY 18, when I was practicing my presentation, people were asking, why is FY 18 so high with regards to our auto claims? Like, what happened there? And I looked into it, and it was a CBJ employee that was driving a CBJ vehicle that hit a pedestrian, and there was high medical costs and various other costs related to that claim. And again, in FY 21, a CBJ van driving with children in it had hit a car in front of them, and there were medical costs associated with that. And with these car accidents and claims, those medical costs are really the cost drivers within those.
Ms. Hale.
I'm not sure I understand the 250,000 SIR, and like these numbers on the left, should there be like 3 more zeros? I mean,
No.
But so if there's a $250,000, is it per incident?
Yes.
So we have to pay $250,000, and then in FY 18, we paid 140, or we got 150,000 from the insurance. Is that correct?
Thank you, Assemblymember Hale. Through the chair, an SIR, that's our deductible. So we have to pay that out of pocket until we get over that amount. So if it doesn't reach $250,000, it's all CBJ funds coming out of that.
Per incident.
Per incident, yes.
So we don't know. So in FY 18, that light blue bar is at $150,000.
Yes.
So is that what we got from the insurance company in FY 18? I don't get this, not jiving for me. We only had one incident and we paid $250,000, and then there was 150,000 more, or what?
What does the bars mean?
Yeah.
Right, the bars correlates to the claims that year. So in auto claims, we had a total of 153,000. And out of, I can only do a best guess without really looking into it. And I'm happy to email you exact numbers,
okay.
but
Just trying to-
roughly say 15 to 17 auto claims. Amongst those 17 auto claims, we incurred $158,000 in expenses.
So the insurance didn't pay any of that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
This slide gives an overview of our workers' compensation cost per fiscal year and fiscal year. The first bar graph is our cost of claims per year, and you can see a downward trend, and this is some good news towards the end of the presentation. And also in the second bar graph, the number of claims per year is going down. I do want to note that FY 21 is a bit of an anomaly. That was in the midst of COVID, June of 2020 to July of 2021. We had less employees in the workforce and a lot of stay at home. So on a normal non-COVID year, I would have seen that downward trend more in line with FY 22, not so drastic. And for future years to come, that's what we're expecting. A good takeaway for our reduction in workers' compensation claims and costs, I think can be attributed to our safety management program. We have a joint CBJ, Bartlett, and Juneau School District program that promotes communication and sharing of resources between all of these entities. Has a greater emphasis on return to work light duty programs. And what we found in the workplace that the sooner that we can get employees back to work, the more productive that they are. They also recover a lot faster the sooner that we can get them back to work. And we hire out for an independent third-party adjuster to manage these workers' comp claims. We have a great working relationship with our TPA. They adjust the claims, they work with the employees through the workers' compensation process and coordinate with CBJ on return to work timelines and goals with medical statuses and follow-ups with health providers and getting all the updates on eligibility to return to work. This is an overview of our risk fund balance from 2010 to 2022. As you can see, it kind of ebbs and flows, and what we're looking for now is to hit and remain as close as possible to our 3-month reserve recommendation of roughly $8 million. And for FY 22, our risk fund balance was about $6 million. And I think the next slide gives a bit of a projection, but in previous years, the risk fund balance, it got up to over $9 million. And so there was a bit of a rate decrease. And then we increased the rates almost by double, and that got us back up to that $7 million risk fund balance.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to understand this graph.
Mhm.
And it's, so some of the things are under the zero. I guess I don't.
Oh, sorry, you're on the next one already.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
I
I was looking
apologize.
at the bar graph. I had a question of the bar graph. actually.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, I was presenting, was there?
Okay.
Oh, okay, was that one not in the? Oh, okay. All right.
can't see the.
Yeah, I didn't speak to that.
Okay.
But you still might have. Okay, so this graph is our risk fund balance by component. You can see here for the projected FY 23 and FY 24, we're sitting right just at or slightly below our 8 million recommended 3-year reserve. When our property balance was in the negative, we doubled rates, and you can see it come above the $0 amount in FY 24. Because we're seeing higher deductibles and higher premiums, I think we're gonna be pretty consistent with where our rates are now and slight increases into the future. Okay, our cyber liability insurance. This has been a very popular topic of late with all entities. I've met with CBJ's IT department, Bartlett's IT department, and Juneau School District. Our current coverage is $2 million in the aggregate, and this falls under our property insurance program, and so it's shared with a pool of insureds. The program annual aggregate is $40 million. The challenges that we're seeing is the excess $2 million policy available is at 275% of the premium in increases and additional security requirements. We're continually looking for other excess coverage policies, and FY 24 coverage will be contingent on many network security protocols that we will need to put in place. within the cyber industry. We had applied last year for additional cyber coverage in addition to this, and we were not able to get it. The security measures that the insurers wanted us to put in place didn't give us enough time to implement these different protocols. And so that would be things like 2- and 3-step verification processes, beefing up our firewalls, and only having certain people access to certain servers, especially with Bartlett Regional Hospital and or the school district, depending on those different security levels of information. And so we're going to keep applying for additional coverage, but I'm just not sure if we're going to get anything in addition to what's already included within our property insurance policy.
I do have a question about this one.
Ms. Glaszewski.
So if I understand what you just said, in order to get more insurance, we have to do more things. And so it kind of seems backwards in that if we do more things, our insurance should be less, not more, right? So that means to me, we are vulnerable here. If I understood the things, we should be doing more things because we could get ransomed from somebody and they would ask for lots of money and we did.
Mr. Watt.
I think
I hadn't, my thing hadn't been on, but you heard me.
I heard you. I think the upshot is insurance companies don't want to sell cyber insurance because there's such a big risk. So we do a lot on that, and they are asking all people that they insure to do more, even though they don't want to sell the policy. So
right.
So
my question really isn't about insurance. It's really sparked the question about, are we doing enough for cybersecurity?
That is not a discussion we're going to have tonight, but we can talk about that later. So let's keep going.
Yes, and I think that's.
Well, we can talk about it later. And also if we have questions, we can ask those of Ms. Swick offline. Thank you very much for your presentation. Mr. Rogers would like us to make one more decision on the deferred comp employer match. I'm not sure we have the capability of doing that tonight. Mayor Weldon.
I was going to make a motion because I can read them recommended action.
Please.
I recommend that the assembly, I'm on page 75 of the regular packet. I recommend that the Assembly Finance Committee direct staff to build the cost of the proposed deferred compensation match into the FY24 budget and to attempt implementation as soon as practical to be funded by available FY23 lapsing funds. And ask you to ask consent.
Mr. Smith.
Sorry. I just have a couple of questions. I think they're very fast. Mr. Rogers, the vesting percentage based on years of service, that's the employer contribution.
That's correct, Mr. Smith.
Very good.
Employees vest automatically in their own contribution.
Very good. Another one, if we decide to change this or do away with it, we haven't created a contractual benefit or something. I mean, could we, if we find out it's too rich or it's costing us too much, we could say, no, we're not doing that anymore. Or do we have is there any contractual thing that we have with an existing employee or something?
Mr. Palmer, I saw you shaking your head. Or Mr. Watt, either one, shake your head.
Chair, so this would be a program that the CBJ would initiate, change or stop on its own. It's not embedded in our employee contracts.
Thanks.
Any objection to the mayor's motion? I see. Are you objecting to
No.
the motion?
Okay. Moving on.
I see none. That motion has passed. The rest of the items on our agenda are info only. I do want to say that Mr. Bryson, as Chair of Public Works, has spearheaded a great job on the waste management and garbage issue. And I think that if you're interested in that issue, you should follow the Public Works Committee and the work that he's doing with Director Kester. Mr. Watt, you can have 30 seconds to talk about your memo if you want. No? Okay, we read the memo. This is certainly an issue that the Assembly is going to keep talking about. The revised budget calendar is in here. I have been working, well, mostly Ms. Spiegel and Mr. Rogers have worked on this with some input from me. I know that we wanted fewer
meetings. I don't think we figured out a good way to do that, but we've made some adjustments to the calendar and we're working on some adjustments to the process to hopefully make it better. But like we've seen, we don't want to lose our focus on the city's finances because we've seen that can lead to bad things. And this just came today, this funding request from the school district that will certainly come back to us, but it's just in your packet so that you know that it's there. And our next finance meeting is next month. Good. No, okay.
2 seconds. Clarification on the school district request. I did clarify with Ms. Olin today that the request is in a amount that we currently provide outside the cap. So those numbers, just so you have them in your head, 2.275 million currently outside the cap, requesting an additional 2.54 million outside the cap. So the new total would be approximately 4.8 million. And I think we'll put this on the March agenda.
Okay, March agenda, which will be on March 1st, and we're adjourned.